Millionaires Vice President of Government Affairs, Holly Woodings, and Patriotic Millionaire member John Driscoll, former president of Walgreens Health, chair of Yukon Health, and the chair of Magnet Global.
Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing this morning? Thank you. First, I want to acknowledge that our fearless leader, founder, and president, Erica Payne, is in the room, but she wanted me to make a funny joke about heel spurs and bone spurs and the current inhabitant of the White House. I wasn't really sure how to put it all together, but just wanted to throw it out there that she's still got her sense of humor, even though she's in excruciating pain. So thank you for being here. My name's Holly Woodings. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs for Patriotic Millionaires. As I said, I'm substituting for Erica this morning. I want to welcome everyone in the room and also online to How We Win, Tax the Rich and Save the World.
And I'm John Driscoll, longtime member of Patriotic Millionaires. We are all in a lot of pain, Erica, so we're here to change that. You know, Holly, there's a fair bit going on here.
There is a lot going
on.
We've got Jesus, Trump.
We do. Maybe the Pope.
There's a little bit of Pope, and I mean, if there's one thing that's united America over the past year, it is not dunking on Chicago Pope.
No, I think that's right. But we did have a big win in Hungary. Big win in Hungary. So I think it's not just how we win, but let's acknowledge that there's a lot of winning that I think needs to happen and is starting to happen right now.
That's such a great point, and I think that Hungary really showed us how we can win if we are able to work together and come together around really great policies and really great ideas that will restore our country.
And focus on making sure that everybody is included in the success of our economy and our country. We're going to tell you a little bit about where we started with Patriotic Millionaires, where we are now, where we're going, and why and how we need your help.
And every good hero has an origin story. About 16 years ago, our then President Obama was fixing to sign the Bush tax cuts back into law. And our founder, Erica, knew then and has always known what we all know now, that wealth inequality and democracy don't mix. It's not a good combination. So she gathered up a bunch of her wealthy donor friends and got them to sign a letter calling on him not to extend those cuts for people making over $1 million. It was a very simple proposition.
We started with a letter signed by a few dozen cranky millionaires, and it's now a global movement.
Well, here's a slogan you don't hear often.
My name's Geeti Singh Watson, and I'm here with Patriotic Millionaires.
Patriotic Millionaires?
We're in the city on their campaign bus.
There was a bus full of wealthy British people actually asking the government to tax them more.
And on the side of the bus it said, tax us, the super rich.
They were joined by the music producer Brian Eno and the economist and YouTuber Gary Stevenson.
If you do not demand reduced inequality, a fairer taxation system, this will get worse and the politicians won't do it for you.
The government's hands are tied by the power of the super rich.
Well, it's the end of democracy.
Every time a wealth tax is mentioned or the arguments against it, seems to be that the rich people will leave.
So it's really important to look at the source of these figures and their wealth migration service. So this is like a carpet salesman saying, everyone's going out and changing their carpets.
Tax the super rich, like me, because everyone deserves hospitals, teachers, hope, and a healthy planet.
Tax wealth, not work, is what I always say on my YouTube channel, Gary's Economics. But you need to design it carefully, which is why I'm always saying to the government, talk to me, bring me in, do the work, let's plan a wealth tax that taxes the wealth fairly in a way that they cannot avoid.
A video that combines my favorite sport, football, with taxing the wealthy is just like a little song for my heart. So now that letter has become a global tax justice movement, as we've seen in this video, and it's extended into states, cities, and small towns all across America, including our largest city in the country.
This is the Upper East Side, one of the richest neighborhoods in America. And some of its multi-millionaire residents have a message for Governor Kathy Hochul.
I retired about 12 years ago from BlackRock, the biggest financial management firm in the country. I want my tax rates to be higher.
Morris is the board chair of a group called Patriotic Millionaires, which advocates for higher taxes on the 1%.
I don't even know how much taxes I pay now. My father-in-law used to say the whole point of having money is to not have to think about money. And I don't. Whenever I talk to the governor, she says, oh, we can't raise anybody's taxes. They're going to just move out. The really rich people, they're not moving away. Even Ken Langone, the biggest complainer, he stayed in his office right in front of Bryant Park the whole time. He was paying a 70% tax rate when we created Home Depot.
As he walked me around the area, passing Brooks Brothers and jewelry stores, he was blunt. He wouldn't even notice a tax increase.
I mean, I'd have a little bit less of a balance in one of my accounts somewhere. And it wouldn't change what I do. It wouldn't change where I eat. It wouldn't change where I go on vacation. It would change slightly the balance in some brokerage account somewhere, I guess.
So if nothing would actually impact your life in a very meaningful way, why do you think that there are so many wealthy people who are vocally against being taxed?
Same way your football team is still playing hard even when they're ahead by 30 points at the end of the fourth quarter. They just want as big a number as they can next to their name because that's their sense of self-worth or sense of value is how wealthy they are. And so they think that if they have to pay taxes, that's like somehow reducing their sense of self-esteem because they're not as rich as they used to be.
And both their net worth and self-worth got a big boost from the $12 billion tax cut for the state's richest few in Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill. Now, the city faces a $5.4 billion deficit. So while the 1% here are enjoying even more brunch in the Met Members Club, working-class New Yorkers are facing vital service cuts. With negotiations over New York's budget ongoing, financial experts like Morris Pearl have the solution for the city's big deficit. Tax them more.
The city's doing a lot of great things. For instance, we have pre-K for 3-year-olds now. It's making them more prepared to go on to kindergarten and do well, but it's also great for their parents. Their mothers can now get jobs and work where they couldn't before. So the city doing these things, yeah, it takes tax revenue, but it returns. It's making the city a better place for all of us, and it's making the city a better place for me, too.
Yes.
Thank you for that nice round of applause for our board chair, Morris Pearl, who is every bit of a gem in real life as he was in that video. I can guarantee it. And also a little side note, make sure to look out for Tax the Rich bucket hats coming to an online merch store near you.
He's started a movement. I love how Morris ends that message. It's better for everyone. It's better for me too. It's really all about how we win. All of us patriotic millionaires are greedy for a different kind of America. One where we all participate and we can all win. If you remember that horrible ad, but very effective ad, that divisive ad about us versus they, them. If there are people that we should really be worried about, if there is a group that we should fear, it's they, them. James Tallarico is the breakthrough star on Instagram and on the internet for Democrats these days. I don't think there's a better articulation of the them we need to worry about than the one that helped him, that he identified in the Texas political race and that he actually talks about in this video.
The only minority destroying America is the billionaires. Trans people are 1% of the population. Muslims are 1% of the population. Undocumented people are 1% of the population. We are focused on the wrong 1%. Trans people aren't taking away our health care. Muslims aren't defunding our schools. Immigrants aren't cutting taxes for themselves and their rich friends. It's the billionaires and their puppet politicians. The culture wars are a smokescreen. So many of the divisions in this state and in this country are manufactured by billionaires who want us fighting each other instead of fighting them. They want us looking left and right at our neighbors instead of looking up at them. The biggest divide in our politics is not left versus right, it's top versus bottom.
There's a really good reason why the Patriotic Millionaires staff is so obsessed with James Tallarico, and I think that that video is about 99% of it. He just absolutely nails the argument that we're making in congressional offices every single day that we're doing our work. So he just focuses his ire at the top of the economic system, and that's where it should be. Not at the bottom. He tells the ugly truth that billionaires fund both sides of the culture war, both sides of it, in order to distract you from the upward transfer of wealth in this country. And it's really only about one thing. It's about money. We're caught in a game of economic Jenga, and our tower is about to tip over.
And it's really about their money, because 86% of all Americans are worried about the price of groceries, of how to feed their families, while billionaires are taking joyrides into space.
The nonpartisan RAND Corporation did an analysis. They found that over 5 decades, that's 50 years, nearly $80 trillion of wealth flowed from the bottom 90% of Americans to the top 1%. 50 years, $80 trillion. So we did what any good policy shop does. We developed a North Star. And our North Star is the money agenda. The money agenda does 4 things. It establishes basic fairness in our tax system. It stabilizes working people so that they can pay for life's basics with full-time work. It reconnects the fortunes of American families to the fortunes of American businesses. And finally, it dismantles the oligarchy to restore American democracy.
So how do we do that? Well, absolutely no new taxes for anyone who makes less than $1 million a year. The Equal Tax Act, the Cost of Living Tax Act, paid for people like you and me, and the Cost of Living Wage Act, one of my favorites, a minimum wage that's at or above the cost of living, which depending on the low end is about $22 an hour. And finally, a series of proposals to start to box and reduce the advantages that the oligarchs currently have in our money-driven political system.
And in the past year, our team has worked with some incredible representatives and senators, 2 of whom will join us today, to introduce both the Equal Tax Act and the Working Americans Tax Cut Act on both sides of the Hill. And we're not stopping there.
Both showdown, win the election, and the power necessary to fix the problem. Holly, we're going to need a great team.
And we have just the most incredible team. I think one of the most rewarding things about this work over the past year has been the coalition that we've been able to build. We've worked with labor leaders, with our partner organizations, and really built an ecosystem and built our policy proposals into that ecosystem to drive the conversation around what fair taxation looks like in the United States of America and how that's going to restore our democracy for the next 250 years.
So now we have a fighter, a leader, and an organizer extraordinaire. Please welcome Randy Weingarten, the president of the American Federation for Teachers and the author of Why Fascists Fear Teachers, Public Education, and the Future of Democracy.
Well, I don't think Randy's quite here yet.
Okay.
She'll be here in just a minute, according to Liz. But let's talk about Randy a little bit. And let's talk about this fantastic coalition of labor and millionaires. It's kind of a powerful friendship, don't you think, John?
I think what's super important, and what I think we know we've been right on the policy and the politics. What's impressive right now about what Erica, you and the team are doing is building out that coalition. Because if we can build out that coalition and identify all of the sources of influence and power that are naturally with us, we can build a coalition that can sustainably win at the local and national level to establish not just our priorities, but turn them into actionable policy.
And speaking of fun coalitions, I also would like to take a moment to encourage everyone to participate in May Day actions. There are May Day actions all across the country being organized by labor unions and progressive organizations to really build the muscle of activism. They have a goal of getting 13 million Americans out in the street. That's 3.5% of the population taking action together. And they see that as the critical number to challenge any election interference in November, to really give people the action that they need in order to keep up helping out their neighbors and making sure that we have the infrastructure necessary to fight the oligarchy. I think that our president has something that she would like to say.
Well, I'll just fill in until Randy gets here.
We got a mic for you, Erica.
I need a microphone?
Yeah.
Since when do I need a microphone, for heaven's sakes? So I'm here injured, but so happy to be here. What a room full of people, first of all. Thank you very much to everybody. And let's just emphasize this both showcase showdowns. If you read the article about Orban's defeat, it very specifically said that the coalition that won is strong enough to make the changes necessary to fix the corruption. That is a huge difference. We have a lot of people right now working on electing Democrats, and I applaud your efforts. I really want to see a group of lawmakers in this new Congress who both recognize the problem, are willing to talk about the problem on the campaign trail, and who are willing to do the changes necessary when they get into office to fix the underlying dynamic that had a 100% certainty of getting us exactly where we are right now. If you create an economy this unequal, an economy that works for an increasingly tiny group of people, you are playing that game right there in the middle of your tables. And it is guaranteed to fall down. There is a 100% certainty of that end game. So the only exercise, the only real exercise is to change the end game. You can't do it around the edges. They've done it around the edges. Doing it around the edges is what got us with this freak show in the White House, sending out memes about him being Jesus and getting in a fight with a pope in a country that prides itself on the separation of church and state. For heaven's sakes. Enough already, okay? We don't have pharaohs anymore for a reason. They were weird and they did mean stuff to other people. Nobody wants to live like that, okay? But we got to get in there and we've got to create an economy in the face of AI and all of these different dynamics that will work. I met with an 80-year-old woman the other day. She told me she was thinking about packing some heat. And I was like, girl, you go pack some heat if that makes you feel safe, but after the revolution, we still have to create an economy that works for normal people. So why don't we just set about to do that? And the fact of the matter, it's not that freaking complicated. It's math. Okay, when 40% of people make less than the price of living for a single adult with no children, and 70% of people make less than the price of living for a single adult with one child, and 86% of people are worried about the food they're going to put in their own mouths and in the mouths of their children, you do not have a sustainable society. We want to live in a rich, stable, and free country. Nobody's doing this to be a martyr. I want to live somewhere awesome. Did you see, Morris bragging about New York? I love Chevy Chase, Maryland. We pay higher taxes than anybody. It's a little spot of heaven. Let's build spots of heaven all over the world and then expand them so they all touch each other so you have one big, beautiful planet. And this is not difficult, okay? The first thing we need to do is treat people basically equally. There's no reason why rich people's money should be treated better than my money. Why is their money more valuable than my money? Okay? It shouldn't be. That's number one. Number two, give people a break. Millionaires and billionaires took $80 trillion out of the 90%. Fix that quickly and immediately when you go into office in January, and then demand that President Trump sign that damn law. Shift the tax burden off of 130 million people who cannot make ends meet, and put it onto the 650,000 people in this country who have incomes over $1 million. And you know what? Keep the first $1 million. We just want 5% more on the second million, and a little bit more on the million after that. Because keep it on back to like the $80 trillion that they took in the first place. It's time to establish that. And what's important about it is it both brings immediate relief. It also requires politicians to make a choice. And it requires Democratic politicians to make a choice. Who's it going to be? Working class, lower class, poorer people, and the middle class? Or is it going to be the donor class? Is it going to be the Epstein class? Is it going to be the sickest class of people in this country? When you get too much money, boy, that'll mess with you. Abigail Disney says there's an amount of money beyond which only, what did she say? Madness. Beyond which only madness lies. Okay? So shift that tax burden when you get into office in January. Then raise the minimum wage to something a human being can live on. Okay, you remember the Gilded Age? Who watches the Gilded Age? Thank God, the Four Seasons. Getting shot, I love that show. They said 8 for work, 8 for sleep, 8 for whatever the hell you want. 40 hours a week, you should be able to put food on the table and a roof over your head, and we know how much it costs. And we got a whole bunch of companies making a whole bunch of money. It's time for them to be required to pay the people who work for them, making them money, to pay them something they can live on. That's not complicated, okay? And democracy is better than billionaires. Democracy is more important than billionaires. Billionaires are an aberration. They are a mathematical certainty built into a system that was created by people. People can create a different system. That's what we're here to do. There's so many important, scary, big things happening in the world. Moments like this require focus. The point of what they do is to distract you. It's misdirection. It's the same way a magician gets up there, steals your wallet while he's flashing something over here. This is misdirection. Focus on the money. Care about all the things that you care about, but take a minute to work on the money. This is the roadmap. Let's get this done. Thanks.
And by the way, that's Erica on one leg. Imagine what she's going to be like when she gets mobile. I think Erica makes a really important point that's reinforced by what happened in Hungary, what happened in Minnesota. The most devastating thing about this current moment is people don't believe they've got power. We have the power to change, reform, to grab back the steering wheel of this country. And as Erica pointed out, if we focus, we win. If we organize, we win. But it all starts with remembering the people of Minnesota showed up without arms, without vans, without armor. They just showed up. Imagine what we could do if we organized politically around the country, like the people of Hungary and the people of Minnesota. It's just extraordinary what we can accomplish. We've got an agenda. Are we getting close?
I got another one in me.
Go. You ready to go? Yeah.
But I think you're right, John. And that's something that we focus on at Patriotic Millionaires all the time, is who are we electing, first and foremost? Who are the people who are going to get to Washington and fight for working people and make sure that the wealthy are paying their fair share of taxes? It's a very, very narrow focus. And we have so many incredible members who have so many different interests and reasons that they want to support candidates, but we keep it laser focused on those candidates who are willing to take on the donor class and help people who are working pay less taxes, pay their basic expenses, and make decent wages. It's really the way forward for this country. And when we think about, the golden age of the 50s, which was not golden for everyone, let's be very clear, there was a huge thriving middle class. And people were civically engaged. People had 8 hours a day to do something that wasn't working and sleeping. They really were living their best lives. They were starting families, contributing to their communities. And when we say that's what we want to get back to, I think that the economic system of the 50s is really the engine there.
Well, the 1932 Fair Labor Standards Act established a minimum wage. We're really, one of the things I'm very focused on, and we're very focused on, is investing and creating an America that can work for everyone. For children who were born in the 1940s, 90+% of them had an opportunity to earn more than their parents did. By taking the basic economic floor and labor standards, labor laws out, the things that actually helped create that foundation around which we created a middle class, less than 50%, it's now 40% and dropping, of parents today's kids will actually have the opportunity to out-earn their parents. That starts to unwind the great American dream and the great American economy. The American economy that between the 1940s and the 1980s was the wonder of the world, that created the power, the opportunity, the success that we've all been able to be part of. And if we really care about creating that same kind of opportunity for our children and our children's children, we have to change right now, and we have to work on the money agenda.
I've heard that we have just another minute or so we're going to keep this little conversation going. You said something about the American economy between the 40s and the 70s. What happened in the 70s, John?
Well, what happened is the Reagan Revolution in 1980 and the lie that greed is good and greed is all we needed to care about. What happened was a restructuring of the tax laws that reduced, that created a two-tier system where ordinary Americans were taxed at a much higher and consistently higher rate than passive income and investment income. What happened was the reduction of some of the constraints that were put on in the post-Watergate rule around money in politics. So we concentrated wealth at the top. We gave the people with the greatest amount of money and the greatest ability to change the system, the ability to do it by finagling around the payment rules and the way politics was financed. And we let that system run at the expense of opportunity in the middle class, investment in the middle class, and frankly, investment in a lot of the public assets that Morris was talking about. Childhood education, college, scholarship support, and now even investment in science and healthcare. I mean, we've got to stop this. What started in the 80s has got to stop now.
I could not agree more. And can I just take a minute to recognize that I get to work for people like John Driscoll. a millionaire who is a class traitor and who knows this content so deeply that I can just ask him what happened in 1974, and he will go on about it for a couple of minutes. Like, I think that's
sadly,
remarkable.
That's true.
Truly,
But
truly remarkable.
Between 1940 and 1980, American productivity goes up. Average productivity of American worker goes up by about 90%. The average worker wages goes up by about 80%. Between 1980 and 2025, wages are tracking at 30%, 1/3 of what productivity is growing at. So the American worker has continued to deliver for the American economy. It's just they're not participating in it. So when we think about why people are tribal and angry and disillusioned, the great lie is that popular opinion doesn't matter and that people should stand back and that they can't participate. But we know how to do this the right way. It's by investing in all of Americans, not just those at the tippy top.
So true. And
so I don't think of myself as a class traitor. I want to create more millionaires. I mean, that's what we really want to do. We want to create more opportunity, more people to go from the poor to the middle class, more people from the middle class to success. Because if we continue to punch holes in the great American system that allowed us to create the great American economy, we won't have an America that we recognize. Erica?
And just a short one, because I think Randy is only
Your mic.
a minute out. But I just want to emphasize this one point that John is making about the money agenda. The purpose of the money agenda is to make the mechanism at the heart of our shared experience work more effectively to deliver the results we need for a stable society. It is not meant to solve every single social ill there is. And it is not designed to be predominantly what conservatives would refer to as a welfare state. We don't focus our energy on the people who are struggling the very most. We don't. I want to admit that. That is a very important priority. What we have to do first, though, strategy is knowing what door to open first so that you gain enough power and momentum to open the next door and the door after that and the door after that. We eventually want to open all the doors until we get into that last one called heaven. And we can build it right here on earth if we do the first door right and the next door right and the next door right. And the first door is making sure that the parts of the American economy are connected and that mechanism creates as much shared prosperity as possible. And if you do that, then the people who live within that system can both hold more human needs in their own families and communities, but they will also have a heart that is open to doing additional things for people who need more things. Okay, when you feel safe inside, how much nicer, more generous, kinder are you? Societies work exactly the same way. If we can make most of this work, if we can make the engine work, we can make the whole thing work, which is why we are thrilled to have two partners with us today, Senator Chris Van Hollen and Randy Weingarten. Y'all come on up to the stage. That was really well timed, wasn't it? I'm impressed with myself. Thank you.
With no further ado, the senior senator from Maryland, our fearless advocate on the Working Americans Tax Act, Senator Chris Van Hollen.
Thank you, John. Thank you all. So, first of all, thank you. There we go. Is that better? Yes. Okay. So it's great to be here with all of you. Thank you to Patriotic Millionaires for what you do to advance ideas and proposals to make our country a better place and strengthen our democracy, and for recognizing that the huge gaps in wealth and income inequality really are a threat to our social contract and a threat to our democracy at the end of the day. So it's great to be here with all of you. Thank you to your team, Erica and Holly and rest of the permanent team. Thank you also to Morris Pearl and John and all of you who are members of the board, and really thank you to all of you. I had a chance to meet with a few of you yesterday at your Icebreakers event, but it's a great pleasure to be here with all of you today. I'm going to be brief in these remarks because I'm looking forward to the conversation. But we all know that in the last campaign, one of the main things that Donald Trump promised was that he was going to make life better for working people. He called them the forgotten Americans. He said he was going to focus on bringing down prices. He said he was going to end foreign wars and bring down prices. And he has done the opposite. Started a war, prices are going up. And last year, their response to what the president had promised was what they called the Big Beautiful Bill, which when you look at it was a big betrayal of a bill, because what it did was provided huge and permanent tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans and big corporations at the expense of virtually everybody else. It did include, and this will be part of the conversation, some popular pieces like no taxes on tips and other provisions, but those were not the lion's share of the tax benefits, and they made those temporary, not permanent. Now, back when we were having the battle over the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, I made the point within our caucus that we definitely needed to have an alternative. And the only question was the timing of the alternative. And I want to thank all of you who are part of Patriotic Millionaires for being part of this great coalition that helped put this proposal forward, because it is not enough, as you know, just to tell Americans what we are against. We have to make it clear to people what we stand for. And this is a part of that. Because I will tell you, sometimes in our Democratic caucus, you know, we look at the charts, we see Trump's popularity ratings going down, and they are. But we should not take too much comfort in the fact, because the Democratic Party is polling low and sometimes even lower. So, yes, we have to fight the lawless Trump administration, but we've got to let the American people know that we're on their side. And that is the fundamental idea behind the Working Americans Tax Cut bill that we worked with you and others to advance. It's based on a fundamental idea, which is that if you're working hard every day and your paycheck is just enough to meet your basic cost of living expenses, then you should be able to keep more of what you earn. And we pegged it at the national median cost of living expenses, which is about $45,000 for an individual. And then we made changes based on the current tax code for households and married couples to avoid the marriage penalty. But the fundamental idea is what I just said. Working hard every day, essentially you're at a living wage. You should be able to live off of that wage and not have it taxed away at the federal level. And we all know that we have an affordability crisis in the country. And as I point out there, and you know, there are two sides to the affordability coin. Yes, of course, we want to bring down costs and prices. Yes, we need to go after monopolies. Yes, we need to increase the housing supply. All of you know that. But you also know that that is hard work and takes time, and we should keep at it. But the other side of the coin, of course, is how much money you have in your bank account, in your checkbook, to meet your basic cost of living expenses. And that's what this bill does. It says that you're going to keep a little bit more of your money. And I think that's exactly the message we need to send. If you look at the Trump bill, their so-called Big Beautiful Bill, 5% of most of the benefits go to the folks at the very, very top. If you look at it, about 5% go to the top 50%, and 75% go to the top 20%. In our bill, 100% goes to everybody else. People who have income tax liability, who are paying taxes even as they are stretching to make ends meet. So I believe, and I know Patriotic Millionaires believes, and all our allies, American Federation of Teachers, you're going to hear from Randy, Move On, Indivisible. We have a great political coalition behind this, and I do think it can make a huge difference, first of all, in people's lives, which is the purpose of it, but also politically in telling the American people that we hear them and that we're on their side. So thank you for being part of this.
Thank you so much, Senator Van Hollen. Can you just start with why you think that this is such an important issue for people in Maryland?
Yes, if you look at Maryland, just like other states, you've got, people who I talk to every day, my constituents, who tell me that they are struggling to make ends meet. I mean, they're really struggling to be able to meet the cost of their rent or the mortgage, groceries, whatever else it may be. They are stretched. And this is a way to say to them that, you know what, we hear you, and you're going to get to keep a little bit more of what you earn. If you're in that category of people, you get to keep a little bit more of what you earn. Let me, I want to just share a story because I mentioned this when we unveiled the bill, but I get my haircut at our local haircuttery in Kensington, Maryland. I don't know how many Marylanders, but, and the barber there, once after the big beautiful bill passed, had taken out her calculator and was calculating the amount of savings she would have from the no tax on tips. And she actually got a fair amount of her income on tips. It was a meaningful benefit to her. And so this bill speaks to her because she's going to do better under this bill. She's going to be able to keep more of what she earns, and on a permanent basis, not temporary like the Trump tax on tips. And then there's the guy who's the sales manager at Target, who makes the same income maybe as she does, but doesn't have any income from tips. And why should someone who gets the same amount of income from tips get a better deal than the person who gets that income without tips? And so what we're doing here is speaking, not just to, the barber at the haircuttery, but to everybody else who is really struggling to make ends meet. And it was really an important moment. I already believe we don't need an alternative, but that really sent a message that we've got to come up. And again, the benefits here is 100% go to people like her rather than folks at the very top.
I can imagine somebody living in Kensington, Maryland, and keeping an extra $3,000 in their bank account every year is going to see that and feel that more dramatically than somebody on the top end paying a few thousand extra dollars.
Very good point. Amen.
Senator, I really appreciate you calling out the misdirection that's essentially part of the messaging. But I'd love you to talk, and it makes sense to me that we would have a hard time convincing all the Republicans to support this bill. But what's making it hard to get all the Democrats to support our bill? What hills do you have to climb, and how can we help?
Well, so there are two pieces to this, and I, of course, neglected to mention one of the big pieces of the architecture of this bill, which was the surtax on millionaires. Thank all of you for contributing to the greater good, those of you who are in that category.
You're welcome.
Thank you, John. And as you know, what we do is, apply that surtax to the first dollar over $1 million. So these are individuals making $1 million a year, and it's a surtax. And it's a tiered surtax. For example, if you're an individual making over $5 million, you pay a little higher surtax. So that's the design. So there are some members of our caucus who don't want to increase taxes on millionaires. I think that they're wrong, obviously, and misguided, and that this would be obviously something that should bring us all together. The other argument, and it's more on some parts of the left, although I don't fully, I obviously don't agree with them, and I consider myself a tax policy wonk too, having been on the Ways and Means Committee. So here, the argument you'll hear, obviously, from some of the tax policy folks who are on the Democratic side is that if we use the revenue generated from the millionaire surtax on what amounts to a working people's middle class tax cut, then there won't be enough revenue to invest in other important priorities. And my answer to that is that's not true. There are lots of other ways to also generate revenue by closing corporate tax loopholes, other individual tax loopholes. And there may not be 100% agreement in this room. I also support different versions of a wealth tax. So the point here is, because, one of the biggest problems in our tax code is the ability to just pass on literally billions and billions of dollars tax-free to the next generation, which is a recipe for an aristocracy in America and really betrays the fundamental, at least idea behind the country. So I just say this is nonsense. Your ambitions are too small. And really what we need to do is do this piece because it's fair to working people, and I think it speaks to working people, and we can do the other things as well. I've made clear that I think this is an important plank in our platform, but it's not the entire platform. But those are the two arguments. I haven't heard so many people make the second, but I think that is the cause for some hesitation on some of my colleagues, and then with others, it's the millionaire surtax.
Thank you for going through those so eloquently. One of the other arguments I hear sometimes is that if we eliminate federal income tax on certain people, they'll feel like they have less skin in the game. Have you heard this one, and how do you respond to that when you hear it?
Yes, I have heard that, and this will mean that we already have, I think, about 30 million Americans who don't pay federal income taxes. You may remember Mitt Romney during his campaign when he talked about the free riders, the 47%. Well, it was by design that those individuals were not paying income taxes. And this, by design, is making sure that people who are earning just enough to make ends meet, or less, to meet their basic cost of living expenses, that they're not having that taxed away when we're facing this affordability crisis. The other thing I constantly point out is that, number one, everybody in the country, of course, does pay in to Social Security and Medicare. I mean, that comes right out of every person's paycheck. And unlike a lot of European countries where the federal government pays for lots of services, including a big one being education, we pay for that at the state and local level. And these individuals are paying their local taxes, whether they're sales taxes, whether they're income taxes, whether they're other property taxes. They are paying for those services at the state and local level. So it's not like these people are not invested in, our democracy and trying to make sure that we provide public services. They are also beneficiaries of them, and they're paying into them. So it's just untrue to say that these individuals are not participating. They are paying, again, FICA taxes, they're paying state and local taxes, and I don't think we should be saying that somebody who's just getting by or below should be paying these federal income taxes.
My relatives in the building trades would radically agree that they are paying plenty of taxes. I guess the question I'd ask, Senator, is how do we start to restore a will to fight and a confidence that we can win? I think one of the most devastating things we've seen with the losing, effectively all branches of government simultaneously is a little bit of a sense of despair and disinterest in the basic work of politics. And I feel like the room sort of lit up. We celebrated the loss of Viktor Orban and the turnaround in Hungary, which is really pretty extraordinary. We are all inspired by the people of Minneapolis. How do we start to restore that sense of fight and win back in our party?
Well, I think that is a critical question. And I think the short answer is we need to demand that everybody use their full powers to stand up and fight and win. If the people of Minneapolis can stand up and fight and blow the whistle on ice to protect their neighbors and take their pictures. Every single one of us can do that. And I will say, I have been heartened by the big turnouts and growing turnouts at No Kings rallies. I've, participated in them all over the state of Maryland. And just imagine how we would feel if none of them showed up. So the fact that they are all showing up is very important, because after all, what I fear most and what Trump wants is for people to be discouraged, right? They want people to shut up. They want them to feel powerless. They want them to go away. And so we need to make sure that we're speaking up and that we're standing up and that we will use our power in every way we can to push back. And I think, look, the midterm elections obviously will be the first sort of direct measure of that. I do think, that we're in a very strong position, of course, to take back majority in the House. And you may have seen, we are closing in on getting to like 50-50 chance, if not more, in the United States Senate. So, but my other piece to that, John, is that would be a huge, obviously, victory. It's not going to mean that Donald Trump wakes up the next day and starts obeying the law. He will continue breaking the law. It does mean that they won't be able to pass things like their outrageous big betrayal of a bill. So we are going to be able to we will be able to call a hearing with decision makers on a war in Iran. They haven't sent anybody up. So it will make a difference, but, and this is why I really think this bill is so important. Midterm elections are really, as you know, a referendum on the party of power. And Republicans have a monopoly on power right now. But the next presidential election is going to be about ideas and what people are offering to the American people, what people are saying that they're going to do for the American people. And so that's why I think it's so important that we not only fight Trump now, but that we advance these ideas together to let working people know and let every American know that we're on their side. That's why this bill is so important.
So since you brought it back to the Working Americans Tax Cut Act, and you know that this has been my almost sole focus for the past year with your team, who are one of the best teams on the Hill, just to be clear, just really fantastic professionals. What was it last year during our lobby day when I believe you met with our Senior Vice President of Tax Policy, Bob Lord, and others from our group? What attracted you to this policy?
So first of all, Holly, thank you for all your work on this. It's been I know, a long road. And Kate here, who's my chief tax policy person, I want to thank her and my whole team, because it does take a team. And thank you to Patriotic Millionaires for being part of this effort. So I've long believed that the Democrats needed to have a tax policy that spoke more directly to working people, because we do focus a lot on the revenue raising side. When I say we, a lot of members of the Democratic Party, I think that we should have, folks at the higher end pay even more. I'm not going to always use the term fair share, because we all know about, but I am going to use the term just do what we need to do for the good of our country. And when I was in the House, I actually advanced a proposal kind of like this. So when all of you also came through the door and said, here's an idea that we're thinking of too, it resonated. And I think that the notion that we decided together to peg the essential, the point at which someone that will not pay federal income taxes at the place where we assess as the basic cost of living expenses in the country, that is a really important message to send. And it's very clear what we're telling people. We're essentially saying if you're working paycheck to paycheck, just able to meet your basic cost of living expenses, that you should be able to keep more of what you earn. And that is the fundamental idea here. And that idea resonated with me in this bill, and it also connected to some of my earlier efforts in the House, where I'd been trying to push Democrats more in this direction.
And speaking of Democrats pushing in this direction, we have 19 co-sponsors in the Senate.
We do, and with your help, we're going to get to every single one.
And who are some of those standout co-sponsors to you? Like, who are the people who you didn't necessarily think going into this would sign on to a revenue-raising bill?
Well, look, we have if you look at the 19 senators, you'll see quite an array when it comes to the ideological spectrum within the Democratic Senate caucus. So, I'm not sure I would say these people were surprised, but you judge for yourselves. I mean, we were able to get on early. My colleague and friend Mark Kelly is part of this. Kirsten Gillibrand's part of this, but we also have Angus King. We also, let me just tell you, this spans from our two independents who are part of our caucus, Angus King and Bernie Sanders. All right, so we've got a broad ideological spectrum, which is why I'm confident that with your help and the help of our other friends, Randy and AFT, the AFL-CIO, with all these groups, that we can, get to almost every member. Because if you look at who's signed up already, we have that very broad sort of distribution along the ideological spectrum within the Democratic caucus. So there's no, I think we have a really good chance of getting, just about everybody on board if we work at it.
Well, we're having a lobby day tomorrow. We're going to keep working at it, and we're going to get every single member of the Democratic caucus with your help. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your leadership, Senator Van Hollen, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much.
All right, now we're really going to introduce and welcome.
First.
Do you want to do it again?
No, it's your turn.
All right, here we go. John, we have a real fighter in the room. Did you know that? She's a fighter.
We have a few, but we've got a special one we're going to hear about right now.
She's a fighter. She's a leader. She's an organizer extraordinaire and has one of the best teams I've worked with in Washington, D.C. Please welcome Randy Weingarten, the president of AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, and the author of Why Fascists Fear Teachers, Public Education and the Future of Democracy.
And we're just doing a talk. I'm not doing a speech. If that's okay.
Well, it is tremendous to have you here with us today. When we started shopping this bill around to our organization friends, we got, quite a few of the, I would say, the known suspects. But AFT was a bit of a surprise to me, and it all happened because you and Erica spoke at the same rally, which I think was really fortuitous. Tell me what you were thinking when you heard Erica speak about this and why you decided to take action.
So it's great to be with all of you, and it's let me just say, to hear all of you say, as the senator said, we need to do this for the working class, and it's paid for by a surcharge on millionaires, and to hear the kind of approval in this room, that's what America should be. And so I just really want to say thank you, because it's really important that what Patriotic Millionaires do is that they make it clear that the common good and the public good is an American value. And so I just wanted to say that as clearly as I could in terms of a thank you. None of us do any of this stuff alone, and none of us make it alone. We make it because of what we each do with each other. And that community piece is what is foundational to democracy. So it was a very, I would say, now in retrospect, it was very fortuitous and funny moment in that, you know, we were in the middle of the endless fights with the Republicans having, as Senator Van Hollen said, a monopoly on all the actual instruments of power. Sorry, I am a social studies teacher, so I'll do a little bit of that. And so we're in a small room that one of the Congress people could get, like, and so we're like packed in this room, and there's like a lobby day on healthcare. So of course, you know, I decide that I'm going to go to that lobby day, and Eric was at that lobby day, and I speak, and I think Erica spoke. I'm in the back of the room, just kind of like listening, and I think Erica spoke maybe right after me or two people after me. I was lingering a bit. I don't know quite why I was lingering a bit. I probably wanted to be late to my next meeting. So I probably was lingering a bit for that reason. But I started listening to what Eric was saying about a working class tax cut, or about how we need to change tax policy. I mean, you know, she's like a total policy wonk. She can like speak paragraphs of policy. Sorry, I don't mean to embarrass you, but you can. And so I stopped whatever conversation I was having with whoever I was having it with, and I really started listening to what Erica was saying. And there have been so many people, so many political actors who've come up to me and said, we need to exempt teachers from federal income tax. I'm like, no. Why not? And I'm like, what do you want? You want teachers to have a target on their back? They get paid by the state and local tax dollar. You want them? I mean, like, we have to, yes, they need to get paid more, but we're not going to just start exempting people after people. So then we're going to exempt police and fire, and now we're going to have, so no, that is not good tax policy. As much as, you know, I have fought for my life to have teachers paid more and paras paid more. But I'm like, wow, the patriotic millionaires are starting to talk about exactly what we just heard Senator Van Hollen say. Make common cause with working people. How do you do that? You have to use the tax code. There's no other, I mean, I love big programs, but they trickle up as opposed to trickle down. And even the child tax credit, which was pretty robust, the Biden administration didn't get any credit for it. And so I'm in the back of this really crowded room now, and then Erica like scoots out in the front, and I like, Megan is with me. I'm like, we're following that woman. I follow her out. I'm like in the hall. I just call her name, and I don't think we'd ever had a conversation before. I mean, maybe briefly. You know, I normally talk to Morris, so it was. You know,
Everybody
New Yorker.
You
had the, and we started talking that day, and I think you were quite surprised how focused I was on how important this was. And that's how it started. And this whole notion of where we are right now, and let me just tell you, when others fast forward to, on Saturday, I was with a whole bunch of paraprofessionals, assistant teachers in Chicago. We were organizing, they were organizing campaigns. So these were leadership teams from about 40 different locals that were, you know, working over the weekend to organize. So, you know, paraprofessionals are lowest paid. Even after 10 years, the average pay is like $34,000. And they started as CETA workers. So like when we started organizing them, it was maybe $2 an hour. So to get to 30,000 but it's not enough. You can't live on that in New York City or, frankly, anywhere. And so when I told them that this bill now had, I think I said 20 sponsors. Now, the light in their eyes of the possibility that federal law could change, policy could change to help people. Seeing that, people just popped up, they started clapping, they stood up because they get it. I mean, these are political people spending their weekend trying to do campaigning, just like you're spending these few days. They just saw a possibility. And that is what's important about making this fight and then ultimately winning this fight. And so, yeah, that was the possibility of that random press conference. I would hope that we would have gotten there anyway. But the other thing I would just say to all of you is this. By having the labor movement, by having AFL-CIO, by having us, it also changes some of the norms of Washington. So even though there are some unions who will not be on this bill because they're concerned about the impact of state and local taxes and things like that, what's happened is they're not stopping us from doing this. So we have changed within the labor movement a huge number of norms of what should be or what could be because of your work. And I really, really, really appreciate that. I'm not naming names.
Madam President, I'm really sorry we can't say that more frequently in Washington for lots of reasons. What's it going to take?
It would certainly be different.
What's it going to, same question I asked Senator Van Hollen, what's it going to take to reignite the willingness to fight and the confidence that we can win from your perspective?
So I think there's a few things. As you, John, asked that of Senator Holland, I wrote down on my notes something that we're now often saying within our union, which, there's a nice little ditty that says, when you fight, you win. Well, we all know that's not always true. And it also creates great apathy sometimes or disappointment when you fight and you don't win. But the converse is actually really true. If you don't fight, you can never win. And what we've started saying to people and talking to people about is, do you want to change or not? And if you want to change, you have to be part of the fight. And to our leaders who get worried sometimes, we talk about the members will excuse and forgive us for losing a fight, but they will never forgive us for not fighting. And so we have to, for the last 20 weeks, we had seven regional meetings. So you notice I'm talking about it, not about Democrats, but I'm talking about it through our members. Because I actually think we have to force politicians to fight. They are not going to fight by themselves. They are going to.
We've seen that.
I mean, they're just not. And they're not, and they go to the lowest, and look, I'm a lifelong Democrat. You all know I left the DNC, but I'm a lifelong Democrat. But they're not, they go to the lowest common denominator. And they are not courageous, particularly in this era of social media when somebody can take a pot shot at somebody all the time. And they seem to have lost the organizing gene, which is what you have to have if you're in politics. And so that's why when I focus on our membership, I think we have to make it easy for somebody to see hope and light instead of seeing fear and darkness. Because in this era, authoritarians whether you call them fascists, authoritarians, demagogues, dictators, or feudalistic lords like, Peter Thiel, they rely on fear, division, apathy, and isolation.
It's really hate versus hope.
Yeah, it's really hate versus hope. But it is intentional. Just like you are intentional in your businesses about how you get things done. They are intentional in how they create chaos, fear, division, apathy, and isolation. I'll give you one example. Talking about the 2016 election, my wife, who is a rabbi, was, going door to door for Hillary, like a week or so before the 2016 election, and she was in Philly, and she's going door to door, and she's a rabbi, and she wears this kind of rainbow kippah, this rainbow yarmulke. So it's, people look at it like, what's that woman doing wearing a So there were 3 young black teenagers who she saw, and she wanted to give them literature. They said, no, we're not voting for the racist, and we're not voting for the crook. Where did that come from? All their and this is 16, this is not now. All their social media feeds, they knew that these young kids who were voting age were not going to vote for Trump, but how do they stop them from voting? How do they deter them from voting for Hillary? So the most important thing I can say is this is intentional. So what is the intentionality that we need to do to actually first get people engaged and then people feeling agency? That's why No Kings becomes so important. That's why the working tax cut becomes so important. And we have to do it in a way that explains things in 20 seconds because the attention span of people, because of this, and I'm as addicted to it as anybody else, we have really lost an attention span. You can't talk in paragraphs. You got to grab people in 20 or 30 seconds. And so that through line between this is what we're fighting for, and this is who is fighting for it, and if we vote, we can get what they're fighting for, which is going to help us. That's what we have to do, and then we have to organize. But if you don't have the message, and it's not going to be, I really hate when people say, oh, just use the right words. Really? It has to be a heart connection. This is what Trump understood. This is what Orban understood. They understood the heart connection. They understood culture. How many times have we heard culture beats strategy for lunch? They understood it. So one of the things I love about the working class tax cut and how the senator explained it is it makes common cause with working people. Working people, look, Americans, everyone in this room is hugely successful. You have fueled the American economy. God bless you. Thank you for doing it. And working people have fueled the American economy. And teachers have fueled the American economy. And so we have to see them. And we have to make sure they feel like they have a part of the American dream again, that there's access to it. And so if you live, and look, my father was laid off when he was an engineer. He was laid off when I was a teenager. And my mother was on strike for many, many weeks when I was a teenager. I remember the conversations in our house about, can they make this payment? Can they make that payment? It's scary. And in our membership, and we are the fastest growing union in America, we organized 263 new units since 2022. 263 new units. When I started as president of the AFT, we were at 1.35 or 1.4. We are now at 1.85 million with all that has been thrown at us. My members, we just did a survey on affordability. Over 10,000 people, 7,500 to 10,000 people answered it. People are living on debt. They are using their credit cards at the end of the month to be able to deal with their student loans. God forbid there is a medical surprise billing. You know this. They're living on their credit cards. my members. Members that average teacher salary, $75,000 a year.
Randy, that's actually a great segue into my next question. This bill has sometimes been mischaracterized as a middle-class tax cut. So can you talk to who those members are? Do you think they're middle class? Like, are they living a white picket fence life with a 2-story brick house? What's going on with them?
Well, you want them to be middle class, but they're not middle class. I mean, some are. Look, we fight, like, you know, we fight very hard to have teachers and nurses. You know, I have the benefit, look, I'm like the luckiest person in the world. I get to represent every single day people who make a difference in other people's lives. Who can be luckier than that? Every single day I get to do that. And so these are nurses, teachers, other public servants, you know, adjunct, higher ed these days. You know, 30 years ago, it used to be 70% of those who taught in higher education were on a tenure track. Now 70% are adjunct professors. Think about the difference. And all of you who pay, you know, college tuition, you don't see that. College tuition has risen in such a way that it's insane. But it's not going to the core of who is teaching. The right wing has talked about universities as elite. 75% of university courses right now are taught by non-tenured track professors. 75%. So an adjunct, take a bus driver. An adjunct professor, you know, in places where we've really fought, $4,000 a course, $5,000 a course. So somebody is cobbling together 4 or 5 courses to try to get some health insurance to try for their family. And what if those 4 or 5 courses are in different schools? So, you know, take Pennsylvania or Philadelphia. So you're teaching 1 or 2 courses at Temple, and then you're teaching at the community college. This is, you know, bus drivers. They're making, bus driving is one of the most important roles in a school system. As anyone who has kids know, $40,000. The person who is the paraprofessional who helps the kid with special needs, whether it's dyslexia or whether it's any kind of motor disability, $34,000 at the max. A teacher, I mean, look, when I was the head of the UFT years ago, I really focused on raising salaries. And so with Bloomberg, who then pretended that he just gave it to us, that it wasn't 6 years of a lot of pain, we raised salaries about 45% over 6 years. And that was a lot, but that created a base that is different. So teachers in New York City are some of the highest paid teachers in the country now. And I give Bloomberg credit for being willing to do it, but it wasn't easy, and it was several years of gives to gets. But that's who our members are. Most of them work 2 and 3 jobs. They don't just work 1 job. They have student debt that mirrors what they're paying, what they're earning, and you know and they don't make enough to live in the places where they teach. And that is kind of like the last piece I want to say, which is you want school teachers to live in the communities in which they teach. You want kids to see their school teachers over a weekend shopping in the same places. You want that extracurricular activity. You want a school, whether you're a parent or grandparent, or you just live in a community, you want the public schools to be the center of communities because of the pluralism that that creates. But if a teacher lives, 5 hours away or 2 hours away, you can't do that. And in fact, we actually built housing in McDowell County, West Virginia. I'll never do it again after that. But we built it because if you know Appalachia, there's no 4-lane highways that gets you to McDowell. So if somebody, and there was not one new housing start, not one new building in McDowell for 50 years before we built it. And so how do you actually get people to live where they work?
I will never forget personally the time that I ran into our playground duty teacher, Ruth, at Albertsons, and I was like, how do you exist outside of the playground of my elementary school? I was so shocked and so confused. And that's an essential experience for kids to have, is seeing their folks in a community, so that's tremendous.
And what happens is that I hear this all the time from teachers. Teachers do not, think about it. You don't become a teacher because you make money. You become a teacher because you love children. You become a teacher and you stay as a teacher. We have a huge attrition rate in education. You become a teacher and you stay as a teacher because you want to make a difference in the lives of kids. So then when you can see one of your kids graduate from high school, when you see kids outside in your community, it enriches the pluralism of the community. And when kids see their teachers at Albertson, that kind of starkness. Tor, can I tell this story? I don't know if Tor is here. Tor, just stand up for a second. So Tor is our he's the head of government relations in the AFT. Now, my mother was Tor's second grade or third grade? My mother was Tor's third grade teacher. So the day that I became president of the AFT, my mother was there, Tor was there. We're back in the whatever that, when you're back of the stage in that area. And all of a sudden, I'm standing with my mother and father, and my mother stands up really straight. And then, like 100 feet down the hall, or 50 feet down the hall, Tor stands up really straight. And my mother says, "Christor, what happened to your red hair?" And Tor says, "Mrs. Weingarten, how are you?"
Well, what I can say is that we are going to keep fighting shoulder to shoulder with AFT and our other labor partners to deliver meaningful relief to your bus drivers, to the people working in your school cafeterias, to your first-year teachers. And we're in this together. We're incredibly thankful for your partnership. Thank you so much, Randy.
Thank you.
Oof, a force of nature. Just absolutely adore that woman. Let's give Randy another round of applause.
Back on the original program.
Back to the original program, John. All right. We're moving on to a really fun and interesting panel at this point. So I have the distinct pleasure and opportunity to introduce our next panel. I would first like to thank theguardian.org, not to be confused with Guardian newspaper, which is a nonprofit partner that supports The Guardian and independent journalism more broadly, focuses on critical issue areas, and their executive director is here if you want to learn more. Nicole, can you raise your hand, please? So find Nicole if you would like to learn more about theguardian.org. We all know that independent and fact-based reporting is more important than ever, especially in the midst of so much chaos and corruption. The Guardian has been a powerful voice for truth and accountability for decades, providing a uniquely global perspective and democratizes information by being free for all. And most importantly, it is not owned by a billionaire who's trying to shape public sentiment on the economy through the op-ed page. It's supported by readers and philanthropy, readers like me. So that kind of journalistic independence is so important when covering the issues that impact everyone, like the affordability crisis, like economic instability, like inequality, and like the health of our democracy, especially in the face of new disruptions like AI, which feels like the defining issue of our moment. I've been a longtime reader of The Guardian and a small dollar donor for many, many years, so I'm really pleased to welcome this conversation and turn it over to this wonderful panel. Please welcome to the stage Dominic Rush, business editor of The Guardian US, Sam Altman, AI and work editor of The Guardian, and moderator Kira Lerner, deputy Washington editor and democracy editor for The Guardian.
Great. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. Thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to be here and be talking about some of the issues that have really formed like the crux of The Guardian's reporting over the last few years, as long as I have been with The Guardian. And it's been nice to meet so many of you and hear that there's a lot of Guardian readers in the room. So thank you all for reading. As news editors, I think we spend a lot of time talking about the affordability crisis. I'm sure everyone in this room does, but we're here today to also kind of connect it to other issues that we have seen happening both in the political world and just in like people's day-to-day lives. We're calling this the age of anxiety. This affordability crisis is leading to a lot of anger and anxiety. There's fears about the future of our democracy, the future of work with new emerging technology like AI. So I'm really excited to be here with Dom and Sam, who lead a lot of the coverage of these issues. Dom has overseen a lot of exclusive polling that The Guardian has done in recent years about the economy and politics. And our polling shows that right now, affordability, more than any other issue, is what is shaping how Americans feel about the economy. We see that people are putting major life decisions on hold, whether it's buying a house, expanding a family, that kind of thing. And politicians from both parties are struggling with how to address this. So Dom, I know you wanted to talk us through some of the polling, but can you kind of explain why people feel that they can't afford their lives, even when the economy might be looking good on paper? Like, what is driving this affordability crisis, and have things changed from the Biden presidency to now under Trump?
Okay, got that. Phew. We started this under Biden when everyone was. You probably remember when everyone was talking about the 5 session and about. Inflation had come down sharply. The U.S. economy had done its usual incredible recovery from disaster, and we saw unemployment coming down to low levels, etc. And yet, all the polling showed that people were feeling more and more anxious about the economy, and we've carried on doing it with Trump. And then I think, okay, so we've got the slides here. So I kind of put these slides in this order just because I think it kind of tells an interesting story, and it goes back to points people were making earlier about how there's a kind of deliberate confusion, I think, at the political level. So if you look at this, about the percentage who say the US is currently experiencing an economic recession, Democrats now think 59% and Republicans are at 40%. But if you went back to Biden, it's just flipped. So I think there's this kind of narrative that, how you see the economy is defined by your politics. And I think if we flip onto the second one, I don't think that's true. I think it's across the board you see that people are putting off major life decisions because they feel so poor. And, a part of that is because of inflation, which, has literally led to heads rolling, governments falling, world wars, etc. People hate inflation. And inflation is cumulative, and prices have gone up and up and up. So you look at these polling, this is both Republicans and Democrats and independents. 75% of those people who didn't own a house were saying that they couldn't see themselves being able to afford it. And we've been talking recently about potentially the declining US population. Well, look on this, getting married or having a child. It's like the majority of people just don't see those as things they can afford. I mean, the Fed has these really awful figures about how 40% of Americans say they couldn't afford a $400 emergency poll. So if we flip on to the third, which is my final one, I think. Yeah, so look, and this was done in March. So this is before we started seeing rising petrol costs, and it's like, you see, the figures are not that out of whack. So I think when you actually get down to the nitty-gritty, when you ask people, if you ask a Republican voter, how do you feel about the economy under Trump, they might be tempted to say, oh, it's okay, because they're kind of responding to their political allegiance. But when you drill down and ask them about how much things are costing them, yes, everything's more expensive. As a number of people have said today, 86% of people say they're struggling with their grocery bills. So I think, in a strange way, that Trump is in the same position as Biden is. So, you can take the headline rates, you can take low unemployment, Pam Bondi's, but the Dow is 50K. It's like all that kind of, it's like, who cares? Like, most people, 90% of stocks are owned by the top percent, the 10%, the most wealthy people in America. And I think it's the bottom 50% own 1% of stocks. So, I mean, they don't care that, what was the other one? S&P 7K. It's like all that kind of stuff. It's just isn't real to people. What's real is when they go to the supermarket, they're looking for the cheaper alternatives. They're going to the dollar store and finding it's $1.50 and not $1 anymore. And that is something that Biden and Trump share, which is kind of bizarre because all the other stuff that Trump has gone on and put us through. It's like he's basically got back to the same position that Biden was in.
Totally. I mean, speaking of that, lived experience and what it feels day to day for the average American, all of this is happening at the same time when work already feels a lot less secure for a lot of people because of AI, but also a lot of other factors. So, Sam, you edit this project at The Guardian looking at AI and the future of work. How are you seeing changes in jobs and wages and potential career pathways contributing to this broader sense of economic anxiety, and how much is AI playing into that?
I mean, I think AI is something that is new. It is an enormous thing that is transforming work and the future. But in some ways, what we're experiencing is anxiety and prediction. We're sort of living in an experiment, and I do believe, and we're already seeing, that AI is capable of really meaningful things when it comes to productivity. But people are sort of predicting the shifts that are happening. I think the biggest changes right now are happening in the tech sector. So in computer programming, software engineering, I think something just came out today showing that students are way less interested in pursuing degrees in computer programming because the largest numbers of job losses that are directly cited AI as a reason why, they're mainly in the tech sector. I think a report came out that showed that between 2023 and 2026, we lost about 100,000 jobs in the US where the employers cited the reason was AI. And I think some of those numbers could do a little more examining, but the vast majority of those job losses were in the tech sector. But I think it'll spread to other places. But in some ways, we really are living in an experiment. I think that it benefits companies to say when they make layoffs, to connect it to some degree to artificial intelligence, whether they're directly saying that it's because of productivity gains, which you saw Jack Dorsey did when he laid off 40% of Block staff a couple months ago, or whether they say that we're prioritizing investments in AI or making business changes. The market kind of rewards that at the moment because it suggests that they're improving productivity and efficiency and cutting human costs, but that impacts everyone else down the line. So we're living, I think the title of this talk is really apt. It's just a moment of anxiety. People are very nervous about what's coming, and AI sort of gives them something to focus on, but those issues when it comes to work and worker power and loss of jobs have sort of been happening since inflation started rising in 2022.
Totally. And just to follow up on that, you've said that the future of work is not already written when it comes to AI. Are there any things that are there any signs of hope that you're looking towards, or anything that gives you more reassurance about how this could be harnessed in a positive way?
I don't necessarily feel reassured in this moment, other than for the fact, and this is something that other folks have spoken about on stage today, I think there's an effort to almost convince the American people that so much of our future is already decided and beyond our control. And I think when it comes to AI, there's very aggressive messaging from tech leaders and even from some politicians that AI is an unstoppable, almost godlike force that we can't control. This tech is very nascent. It's still developing. We're still experimenting with it. And something that gives me hope is that it's not decided yet. And we are seeing some movement in that white-collar workers, a la software engineers working for Amazon corporate, are starting to realize that some of the same business and management practices used on blue-collar Amazon workers in warehouses and driving delivery vans, they're starting to realize, wait a minute, some of these same practices, like the surveillance, the algorithmic management, are starting to be applied to me and my cushier white-collar job that used to make me feel really secure. And it's perhaps urging people to reconsider collective action in the workforce. I've spoken with labor experts who say when it comes to AI, if we remember this tech is still being developed, it can be shaped. If workers who are actually using the tech are able to have some input into how it works, it has the potential to not only be more productive for the economy, but perhaps not a destructive force in the lives of workers.
Totally. You mentioned how, politicians are responding to this moment, and I want to talk about that for a minute. Because as a politics editor who has now worked through several prominent election cycles, I've kind of seen how prominent lawmakers have lost voters' trust on the economy and promises to, address this affordability crisis. Recently we have seen a few who are capitalizing on populism have a bit more success. We talked about some of them earlier today, like James Tallarico and Mamdani in New York. But largely, I feel like in that absence and in that vacuum, we at The Guardian have been looking a lot towards grassroots movements and unions and others who are trying to set the narrative on this and might be driving language that might be effective for politicians. So Dom, I know you also pay attention to this. Do you think politicians are proposing innovative solutions, or are people having to look elsewhere?
I do think it's a really interesting moment in that, Tallarico, Mamdani, Plattner is in Maine, etc. So there are these kind of progressive candidates coming forward, and obviously I'm more familiar as a New Yorker of some 25 years now, weirdly enough. I thought I was going to stay for 2 years. Yeah. You obviously have seen that with which was mentioned earlier, like pre-K coverage, etc. So you're actually seeing these things come through, and there's and it's going back to that slide where people were talking about affordability, and that was both Republicans, Democrats, and independents. I think there is more. People have more in common. People have the same needs. They want to feel that their children are looked after. They want to know they're going to good schools. They want to know. They might vote Republican for various reasons or Democrat for other reasons, whatever. I think people can come together on those, which I think is what happened in New York. I think people came together we do need some kind of care in the community. We do need somebody who's going to kind of look after people who are less advantaged than I am. I think people can be brought together on those issues. But at the same time, and you know this better than I, you see a lot of pushback from even within the Democratic Party. When you put forward somebody with progressive values, you see a lot of pushback on it, don't you?
Yeah, for sure. I think you're right, though. A lot of our reporters who are based outside D.C. and New York, they'll go out and they'll talk to voters outside the polls or, you know, at the grocery store day to day. And things aren't as, like, polarized as we might feel they are from here. You know, I think the affordability crisis is really, like, driving people towards any kind of politician that can speak to them on the issue. So I think there's real opportunity there.
Yes, they do. And I was just going to say, it's like, because they do also, it's like the polling shows that people want sensible gun reforms. The polling shows that you know, people support a woman's right to choose. People are supportive of tackling the climate crisis, etc. And so I think that we, as Americans, have more in common than the political system would suggest at the moment.
That's a hopeful note.
You know, something that also unites Americans is a dislike of artificial intelligence. It's like a bipartisan issue. I mean, a poll that was slightly alarming that came out in March from NBC News found that the only thing less popular with Americans than artificial intelligence is Iran and the Democratic Party. I know, that tells you something. But it's a distrust of AI and a wish for it to be regulated is a bipartisan issue.
Yeah. But I think one thing that a lot of Americans also agree on is that not only are like things costly and we're dealing with this affordability crisis, but the system is also rigged, and that's, you know, happening from the top down. So a question for either of you: how does that change how people interact with political institutions, and what does that? I mean, I'm always thinking about the midterms as a politics editor, but what might that mean for the midterms?
Yeah, I mean, that's the real tricky one, isn't it? Because I do think there's like a huge... Americans at the moment, and this is not just true of America, you see this globally, people are voting for change, aren't they? So, and then they don't get change because the system seems to be so stacked against them. So then they vote for change next time too. So it's and the distrust, I mean, to Sam's point on the Democratic Party, and I mean, it's that both parties are...
Both parties.
Both parties are deeply distrusted here, aren't they? And we've seen the same in the UK. We've seen it in... Starmer was obviously elected because after all these years of Conservative rule, people were fed up with the Conservatives, but the minute Starmer got in, it didn't change anything, and it just feels like the system is broken, and that's what people are looking for. So I don't have a note of hope on that one, I'm afraid.
Good. If you put all of this together, you know, the affordability pressures that we're seeing now, AI disruptions already here and potentially coming in even larger numbers, are we heading towards a more unstable version of the same system, or are we headed towards something fundamentally different?
Well, I don't know. I mean, like, I'm really interested in what Sam thinks here, because I know Sam's series is fantastic, and everybody should read it. But it's one of the things I think is really interesting is that you take a very skeptical look at what's happening with AI now, and then there's a lot of talk. And going back to the share prices stuff, part of that is driven up by this kind of boosterism for AI. It's going to cause this enormous change in society. It may not do it. But my fear is that there's two alternatives here. This is really gloomy, sorry. But so either it's an AI bubble and it bursts and stock markets crash and we all get laid off because companies are trying to save money because of their share prices, or it's true and we all lose our jobs. It's like, it seems, so it doesn't...
I don't think it's so extreme, actually. I truly don't. The AI boom is not the crypto boom of 5 or 6 years ago. That was mostly hype. AI is already a transformative technology. However, I think some of the claims we're hearing about how it will be able to replace vast swaths of the workforce are not true. or at this moment, they're highly theoretical. I think that some of the layoffs we're seeing, even in the tech sector, where AI is capable of doing large parts now of a computer programmer's job, many of those workers will probably be hired again, or they'll hire new workers for different roles. So I think that instability may come in the short term. I think what concerns me a little more about the impact of AI, if it continues as it has been in terms of being rolled out in the workforce, is not so much vast worker replacement, but using AI as a tool to further erode worker power and autonomy, which has been happening since the 1970s. Like, these tools will be used to more intensely surveil workers, to micromanage them, and to squeeze more productivity and efficiency out of them, I think, more than replacing them en masse. But I do think, like, the anxiety about being replaced en masse makes people subject to maybe accept those changes in their workforce more readily, because they're just anxious about having a job in the first place. They're anxious about affording unaffordable life in the United States. So I think it's very important to realize that change may be less about replacement and more about controlling your workforce and disempowering them. And again, that's why I say it's important to remember it's not decided yet. It's still very much an experiment and a work in progress, and the tech is still nascent.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, because coming back to why we're here today, because like with you guys, obviously, it's, if the money is going up the chain to the people who own the equity and the people who run these companies, those people are getting, the Thiels of the world are getting richer and richer, etc. And at the same time, the people who are working for Amazon, or increasingly, like, what do you remember when, it's not that long ago, when Obama and Clinton, etc., were all saying, hey, everybody needs to learn coding, and now
no one wants to.
Yeah, I'm quite right too.
And it was not that large a part of the population, but for some part of the population, if you learned how to code and you got good at it, you actually did have some hope of upward social mobility. And that seems like it's being threatened in this moment. I know people have a lot of feelings about tech workers, but it did create social mobility for a certain portion of the population.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I keep bringing this back to potential nuggets of hope, but maybe it's because I'm about to bring a new life into this world in another month. I've got to look towards the future. Oh, thank you. But you know, in this age of anxiety, I'm in this moment thinking about the next generation, how we can set it up for them. So I wanted to ask you both, like, a lot of people do feel really nihilistic right now, but what is making you hopeful, or who are you looking at, more importantly, for hope?
Again, what is hopeful to me is, like, I'm so certain it's not decided, and there's still time and room for us to shift course and change direction. I mean, I think Mom Donnie's election in New York City was really hopeful, and the world is watching that to see, like, if you start to fulfill some promises of making life more affordable for people, what happens to your city and to your society. I also just think, you know, I've been a tech editor for like 15 years. I sense that people are really longing to move beyond their screens, to connect in person, to distance themselves from technology, even though it does addict us and consume our lives in certain ways. And I think when we begin to move conversations about politics or the challenges we're experiencing as a society to in-person experiences and connection, which I really see the younger generation fighting for, I feel optimistic about that.
Yeah, and I mean, I do have a sense of optimism in that I think that we seem to be in a swing cycle, don't we? I mean, and I think we're going to swing back the other way. I mean, I think, you know, we'll probably be able to talk about DEI and things like that in the near future, and people will go, oh, that's a good idea. Maybe we should have maybe our company should represent what the people it, you know, serves, etc. And I feel like, you know, this is great, and this is my second time being here. And I think the idea that we do have more in common, and if we can find ways of bringing together, you know, Randy Weingarten is a huge hero of mine. He's fantastic, and to to come to a room full of rich people and who want to pay more taxes, etc. There are communities that can be brought together that can kind of, push back and hopefully make things better rather than worse.
Totally. And I'll just answer that question myself too. As a democracy editor, I feel like voter turnout in recent, very much off-year elections has been giving me hope as well, both the data and anecdotally. I think people are really driven right now, and that's been really heartening to see, and we'll see how that plays out. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
What a nice positive note to end on. That gave me hope. How about you, John?
I'm feeling slightly better, but slightly disoriented as well by all of the things we have to take on. But this is, I think, all about hope. Hope versus hate. I think that Randy really hit it. And then from Senator Van Hollen, it's about, a real kind of cautious optimism and confidence that we can win. So I'm feeling good about our prospects.
Me too. So now that we've thanked theguardian.org for their terrific panel and the timely discussion, it's my pleasure to give a real introduction to my co-host, John Driscoll. He's the chair of Magnet Global, the chair of Yukon Health, former president of Walgreens, and former CEO of CareCentrix, among many other titles. And in addition to being an accomplished business leader, he's also the author of Pay the People, which I believe is available in the lobby for anyone who would like to read it.
It's available everywhere.
Available at your favorite
right,
independent
Diane?
bookstore.
Yes. But please buy it directly from the New Press, and we'll figure out a discount program.
But it highlights his experience turning around CareCentrix by paying its frontline employees enough to live and cutting executive pay to pay for it. So please give a warm welcome to John Driscoll.
Thanks, Holly. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about, how I came to that decision to freeze executive pay 12 years ago and invest in frontline employees. But it started with getting to know my frontline employees and suddenly realizing that some of my employees, and one in particular, was living out of her car with her child. We were paying the then appropriate federal minimum wage of minimum $7.25 an hour, and people literally couldn't afford housing. Good employees. Another set of employees needed to had advances on their salary for diapers. I just thought it was insane that we could believe that we could turn around a company that was then in real trouble by paying starvation wages. We had a great result, but I want to talk a little bit about, as I dug into it as a broader policy matter, about just how big a hole we're in and how we can get out of it. I talked a little bit earlier about the 1932 Fair Labor Standards Act, which wasn't just a way to fill the time between Erica and Randy and Chris. But I really want to remind you that we used to have an economy that worked for everyone. We had a democracy that worked for everyone too. And we've got a number of billionaires and conservatives who are taking advantage of a very angry electorate, but it wasn't always that way. Between 1932 and 1980, we had a social contract where the vast majority of people had a chance. Not everyone had an equal chance, but the American economy at every level was rising. As it rose, America rose. As it rose, workers rose with them. That social contract, once it broke down, has not been healed, and it is leaving way too many people behind. I talked before about how the post-Watergate campaign finance reforms that were in place, people either found ways around it or broke it. And since then, effectively, the Congress has slow-walked increases in a minimum wage. People forget that at the March on Washington, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, A. Philip Randolph in 1968 was talking about a $2 minimum wage as part of that social contract, not just on civil rights, but economic rights. That $2 minimum wage, inflation adjusted, would be $21 today. We've gotten so far away from where we could and should be. Investing in our own economy, in all the entry-level parts of our economy, that is basically creating an economic system that is hollowing out at the core and also hollowing out our democracy. People rage against a system because they're saying that it's rigged. Well, it is. It's rigged against workers. Costs are way up. Just since 2020, costs are up 29%. They're going up every day, obviously, because of the war. American workers, entry-level workers, are consistently running up a down escalator of cost that's pushing them farther and farther behind. President Weingarten talked about how many teachers are working 2 and 3 jobs. There is no entry-level worker with a family that's just working 1 job. That hurts communities. It reduces civic engagement. It weighs on families, and it makes it harder and harder to believe that you're ever going to dig yourself out of a hole. She talked about debt, but there's also overwork. And by the way, this is done at the same time that the American economy has never been stronger. Even with the impact of the war, Wall Street is near all-time highs, and executives are paid more and more. During the 1960s, the difference between CEO pay and average worker pay was around 30 times. Now it's closer to 200 times, and it continues to go up with no end in sight. And that's while entry-level workers and the average worker is falling farther and farther behind. If you were working class or an entry-level worker or a low-wage worker, of course you'd think the system was rigged because it's rigged against you. Today, 58 million people in America are working for less than $15 an hour. We know that the living wage is around $23 an hour. If you simply inflated the minimum wage of $7.25 through 2009 till today, at the cost of living up through the beginning of this year, it would be $26 an hour. So pick your number, 21, 23, 26, 30 probably in the major cities like LA and New York. Workers are way behind and falling farther and farther behind. Corporate profits, on the other hand, are again at all-time highs when we've got millions, tens of millions of workers working full-time jobs who are homeless. Think about that for a second. It's not just my company, it's companies all around America. You know, Republicans want people, conservatives want our workers to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But again, Martin Luther King, in one of his speeches, said, look, how do you pull yourself up by your bootstraps when you have no boots? Americans are working harder and harder for less pay while we allow executives to subsidize rocket ship rides to the stars, and their zombie politicians stay silent. Oh, and by the way, all of you are paying for it, because guess what? Those low-wage workers are on Medicaid. You're paying for it in your taxes. $66 billion, about $11 billion in food benefits. If you throw in housing assistance, a conservative estimate of what you and all taxpayers are doing to subsidize starvation wages for companies that don't pay a living wage. This is benefits that are actually going to these full-time workers. It's about $107 billion a year. So just think about that. We've got taxpayer subsidies for starvation wages to underwrite profits that are going away from the workers and towards executives in Wall Street. It's insane. It makes no sense. I don't see how any of us can sit by while the greedy few at the top, executives and Wall Street investors, cheat the average worker out of their fair share. We talked, I think it was Senator Brian Holland said he doesn't like to talk about fairness. Well, let me tell you, the average American worker wants to talk about fairness. They think they're working harder and harder, and they know they're not getting their fair share. It's shameful, cowardly, unfair, and it doesn't make any sense. We're also hollowing out the opportunity that creates the engine to spread the wealth. When you give low-wage and entry-level workers more money, guess what? They spend it. A few years ago, when California went to $20 an hour for fast food workers, there was a lot of conservatives crying crocodile tears how that would cripple the fast food industry in California. Well, guess what? A couple of years later, 10,000 more fast food jobs in California. When we invest in workers, the economy wins, and we win. Let's think about what we can do about this. We've talked a lot about the WATCA, the working class tax cut, but we're also working on a proposal to tax those companies that don't pay workers their fair share. If we don't change and return to that social contract, I fear we're going to be in a continuing unstable nightmare of hard work and downward mobility, and that will fuel more and more anger. If big corporations won't pay, let's make them. Let's tax them. Since the minimum wage is stuck, we're working on a proposal that for companies that make more than $10 million in profits, that are not paying a living wage, that we tax them to a level where we can actually return that money to workers, either directly in subsidies or things through the Earned Income Tax Credit. The most important thing is that they should start to pay their fair share, and let's reverse this $110 billion taxpayer subsidy for people who aren't willing to pay their workers a fair share. Let's pay the people the wages they earned, the wages companies can afford, and the wages that they deserve. Let me return to something that Martin Luther King spoke about in another speech. He basically said, whenever you're engaged in work that serves humanity, it has dignity. It is a crime for people to live in this rich nation and receive starvation wages. Let's pay the people. Thank you. So I'd like to bring up the stage Jacob Brooks, Director of Team Money, who will explain how we start to break down the tribal boundaries of this all too partisan moment.
Hello, you got me? All right, thank you, John. My vowels are long and I talk slow, and I've only got about 5 minutes, so I will dive right in. First of all, I am tickled pink to be here with you from the great state of North Carolina. Always love being in Washington, D.C. Yes, clap, thank you. Okay, so next slide. Oh, man. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a couple of stories intertwined about our organizing work in North Carolina, how I came to be a part of the role, and where we are going in the future. So 5 years ago, this senator decided that she would sabotage all of the working class Americans and decided to vote against a federal minimum wage. She does not need to be named. May she not be remembered in history. 8 Democrats and every single Republican voted against that $15 minimum wage amendment. And so the Patriotic Millionaires launched the Great Economy Project in 2022. Now, I was not a part of Patriotic Millionaires in 2022. I was trying to finish up law school at UNC. I got through by the hair of my chinny chin chin. I clerked for a bit, and then I got a call from this remarkable leader named Erica Payne, and she said, I need a director in North Carolina who understands the plight of working class folks, particularly in rural communities who have been left behind. I said, I'm really interested. She says, great, I want to cut the Gordian knot. Next slide. I said, Erica, I went to public school in the mountains of North Carolina. I have no idea what a Gordian knot is. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure that I know what a Gordian knot is now. So, long story short, this Greek classical tale is of cutting through the BS, if you will. Let's get to the heart of the matter. Let's cut the Gordian knot. Let's solve the economic crisis in America. She said, that's what I want to do. And I said, that sounds really interesting. She said, well, what do you know about that? I said, well, when I was growing up, from the ages of 12 to 14, I got paid cash under the table at a Christmas tree farm, making $6 an hour to help my family make ends meet. Before my mother passed away, she was making $9.50 an hour as a shipping clerk at a local building supply yard. My dad worked construction for $18 an hour. I'm a first-generation college student. My family's on Medicaid. Prior to that, we weren't even insured. I don't know if you guys recall that time, like when it was the Wild West, and you didn't even have to have health insurance pre the Affordable Care Act, and that was how I grew up. So I knew a thing or two about it. She says, that sounds close. Tell me something else. And I said, well, when I was 9 going on 10, my father bought me an AK-47 for my 10-year birthday, and which I thought was weird because I asked for a guitar. And she said, all right, you might be the guy. So she told me this remarkable story. Next slide. About her and Morris Pearl and several other patriotic millionaires traveling through rural Appalachia, rural America. They went from West Virginia to Kentucky to Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. They were at a Dollar General parking lot, and then she told me about Tudor's Biscuit World, where the biscuits are as big as your face. There is actually a term for that in the South. Does anyone know what the term is for a biscuit that's as big as your head? Close, close. Well, we call it a cat head biscuit because it's as big as a cat head. That's your fun trivia fact for today. So eventually we decided that we would focus on rural North Carolina, a little town called Whiteville. So it's in the southeast corner of the state, not too far from Wilmington. We invited folks to come out and hear what we had to say. That there was this ragtag group of patriotic millionaires who were saying, you know what, let's just rip the mask off. We're not paying our fair share in taxes. You are getting screwed. And we're reaping the benefits, and we need to fix this. So that is what happened several years ago, and we will see where we'll take a break for a quick video. My bad.
I want to pitch you on this project that I'm running in deep red towns in North Carolina. We're not going to talk about funding or not funding the police. We're not going to talk about abortion. We're going to talk about money. Money. Wait, what are we going to talk about? Money. Wait, what? Money. Right. We're going to talk about money.
We had been Democrat all of our lives, but I did not see anything that they had done that helped me.
Working class conservatives and working class liberals are both getting equally screwed.
I have 4 different jobs. One job does not cover the funds that it needs to cover.
I run a group called the Patriotic Millionaires. We have a group of people who are proud traitors to their class.
Sad billionaire.
I am not anti-cash. I am not anti-rich. Let me tell you, I've been broke and I've been rich, and I like rich a lot better. We're anti-unfairness. And what we got in America right now is unfair.
All right, and so out of that remarkable journey, we organized all across North Carolina, particularly in the southeast part of the state. The deciders went to Raleigh in March and April of 2025, they were the largest cohort of any organizing group in the state of North Carolina to go to Raleigh to meet with legislators, to demand a raise in the minimum wage, and to talk about the tax code. And from that, there was one shining star who decided that more could be done. And with that, I'll show you this.
She's going to be able to facilitate change.
Too often, Whiteville shows up in the headlines for all the wrong reasons.
House Majority Leader Brendan Jones. Brendan, thank you very much. We're making progress, Brendan.
House Majority Leader Brendan Jones pulled out a book called Santa's Husband.
This book tells the story of Santa, his husband, and their life at the North Pole. Is this what you're telling the children to read? It's trash. That's what good that is. Here's a great one here.
I come from a family of service. My mom was a social worker. She arranged food stamps to make sure people's families could always eat. I served in the Army. I'm a single mom. I worked multiple jobs just to cover the basics. When I started organizing in Whiteville, I started hearing the same thing over and over again. People were like me, working full-time and still couldn't make ends meet.
All right, well, we're talking about how minimum wage has been the same since 2008, $7.25.
These poor people out there are getting screwed and ain't getting kissed. I don't care what your political party is. This is about money and taxes, so...
Helping our country be a better place.
The Deciders showed me something that changed everything. When power gets that comfortable, it stops listening.
I'm his intern and I'm filling in for his LA right now.
Oh, okay. And that's not how it's supposed to be. People should be able to reach their elected officials.
My information is on that card, so if you have any questions or...
People should be heard.
I did not know I was going to be at your house.
You have my support. Yes, you have my support.
Brittany Newton, we're proud of you.
I'm not running to fit into the system. I'm running to change what it looks like so people like us can finally win.
Oof, powerful stuff. Brittany is really incredible, and I know from experience how hard it is to put yourself out there and run for public office. So we're very, very excited for her and just hopeful for her candidacy. So I'm going to hand it over to one of our wonderful patriotic millionaires, Andy Burnt. Andy Burnt is the co-founder of Google Creative Labs. He is a wonderful member of the Patriotic Millionaires. He helps our staff all the time, whether it's marketing or just trying to piece things out. He's just a phone call away for us. So without further ado, Andy is going to come up and lead a discussion with Brittany and with others who are running in the red zone.
I am Andy Byrne. Thank you, Holly, for that intro. I am a replacement for Erica Payne. Let me just tell you, I tell you this, if you ever want to feel a stark and sudden sort of assessment of your own capabilities, have someone tell you that you're going to replace Erica Payne on a stage. Okay, I am very quickly just going to bring an amazing person up to the stage. So, straight from Whiteville, live and in person, Brittany Newton.
Good morning. I think it's still morning time, right?
First, I want to say thank you to the Patriotic Millionaires for allowing me this opportunity to stand on this stage and to truly be heard. I can't put this into words. And a special thank you to Erica Payne, who believed in a small town in North Carolina that it could help save democracy, and that's where I'm from. I'm a country girl from Whiteville, North Carolina, in Columbus County, and this journey is happening fast. 3 years ago, I never imagined that I'd be standing here in Washington, D.C., speaking to leaders like you. Because of this journey, it started with something simple. I agreed to attend a dinner and to talk about the economy. Now, I've heard of minimum wage. Most folks in our community have, but that night was the first time that I've learned of something different, a living wage. Not just the legal minimum, but what it actually takes to live, to pay for food, clothing, shelter, gas to get to work, the basics that make dignity for people. And what struck me the most was that people had actually calculated the number. Every county in this country has a calculated number. We have the data, we know the target. Back home in Columbus County, I later learned that on average, we are the lowest paid county in North Carolina. And today, the real living wage is $18.60 per hour. That number changed me. Because once you see the truth in numbers like that, once you realize how hard working families have to do, what they have to do just to simply survive, you can't unsee that number. So I didn't just learn, I got organized. I started showing up, I started listening, I started leading. For 3 years, I traveled to Raleigh again and again, advocating for better wages, stronger communities, and during all that time, I tried to meet with my own elected representative. I never was allowed a meeting, not once. And then something unexpected happened. People began asking me if I would consider running for office. Now, I'll be honest, I did not jump to the idea. I gave them a list of other names who would make great leaders, and I told them to ask someone else. But the community was very clear, and they said, no, we want you. So I prayed about it, and I asked God, if this is something you truly want me to do, then show me. And the answer was simple. It's not about you. It's bigger than you. You're just a vessel. And from that moment on, doors start opening up. And now here I am, running the race to win. Not for myself, but for the people who feel unseen, for the families working 2 and 3 jobs, for the children sitting in classrooms where resources are shrinking while expectations keep rising. Because let me tell you, the blows against education in rural America are real. When schools lose funding, communities lose opportunities. When teachers leave because they can't afford to stay, children loses mentors. When education is weakened, the future is weakened. But I believe in rural America. It can be the model for what we overcome division, not the example of failure. Because in rural communities, we will still understand something is powerful. When you invest in people most affected, when you listen to what they actually need, when you give them a voice, you bring people together. You build unity. You create change that lasts. That's why my term in North Carolina State House, we be focused on practical solutions. Solutions that move us toward the $18.60 living wage. Strengthen public education and bring real opportunity back to small towns. Not talking points, not slogans, solutions. because I believe in the future of America. It's not just in big cities. It's in small towns. It's in neighborhoods. In communities that have been overlooked for far too long. And here's the truth. When rural communities rise, America rises. That's why your work matters. That's why your investments matter. And that's why gatherings like this matter. Because the energy in this room, the commitment to fairness, to dignity, to democracy, has the power to move far beyond Washington, D.C. We need to carry this energy back home, into small towns, into neighborhoods, into classrooms and community events. We need to be the change we want to see. I'm going back home soon, and when I do, I'm going to keep doing what got me here, showing up, listening, and bringing their voices with me to Raleigh. And I truly believe this. Even when you don't think you're enough, God can place you exactly where you need to be to lead. And right now, I believe we have a winning shot to make something feels like a miracle happen. Not because of one person, but because of all of us. Working together, listening to each other, investing in people, believing in the future. Thank you for listening. And if you'd like to connect with me afterwards, I would love to meet you. God bless you. God bless America. And let's keep moving this work forward.
All right, let's chat for a minute. That was awesome. Killed it. I'm so excited to be here with you. We are so psyched for you, and you're doing an amazing job. So we have to cut back to a bunch of us millionaires stuffed in a white rental van, driving for a few hours through North Carolina. Erica making us sing campfire songs. And we get to this place called Whiteville, and we meet a bunch of people. And we meet Brittany, and she's got this light in her eyes. And she's paying attention. She's listening to all this stuff. And you could just tell she's one of these people with courage and one of these people who gives a damn about other people. So we are so lucky to have her up here and ask a couple quick questions so you can talk about your bad self. All right, this is good. All right. So, question number one: why did you decide to run against Brendan Jones, and what do you want to accomplish with this campaign? Try again.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I decided to run because we need change. Going to Raleigh back and forth and having the door closed in your face over and over again and not being able to speak to your elected officials is not right. You're elected for a reason. You should be talking to your constituents. And if I'm going to you and I'm not able to talk to you and I'm calling your phone and sending emails and not being able to reach you, how are you benefiting our area? How are you benefiting the people that need you most? And so that is the reason why I decided to run, and just being fed up of not being able to speak to somebody that we voted in. So that's why I decided to run.
Good for you. Good for you. Okay, so what has been the response to your campaign when you announced? What are you feeling back from that?
At first, I was nervous, but the response, even just announcing it, it was just support, like overwhelming support from the community. And man, like I just never expected that. For one, I'm the youngest person running for this position in my area. Let's start there. And so I was like, dude, are they going to believe in me? But they have been so supportive of me, just knocking on doors. I would think people wouldn't answer the door, but they've been answering and talking to me and wanting to speak to me. And so that's encouraging within itself, that people are tired and they want to be able to speak to their elected officials.
Wonderful. So what do you say to, I mean, you are running against one of the most powerful Republicans in the state in a deep red zone. So what makes you think you can beat him?
People are tired. That's one. The other thing is he is powerful. But if you're powerful and you're not doing anything for the area that you're representing, what's the use of you being there with the power? And so that's what's going on right now. I mean, he's powerful, yes, and he has a lot of money coming to him, and I mean, he feels like he's on top of the world. But hey, even giants fall.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, we're going to invite a couple of people to the stage. Holly.
Thanks, Andy. We're actually going to interrupt the panel real quick for a special guest speaker. We have Representative Delia Ramirez here with us. She's going to speak for just a few minutes about the Equal Tax Act, which you will recall is part of our 4-part strategy to restore American democracy and our economy. So without further ado, please welcome Delia Ramirez from Illinois.
Well, greetings, everyone. It's good morning still, right? I got on an early flight from Chicago. I landed about 20 minutes ago, and here I am with all of you, trying to figure out this. Yeah. Did you just hold it? Okay, there you go. Well, it's good to be with all of you. I'm Congresswoman Delia Catalina Ramirez, and I have the honor of representing the mighty Illinois 3rd Congressional District. And because I know that you don't know every single congressional district around the country, let me tell you just a moment where that district is. It's in the northwestern part of the city of Chicago. Any Chicago people here? With some claims to Chicago, there you go. Yep, I see it here. So Logan Square, Humboldt Park. And then I go west. So if you've ever landed at O'Hare Airport, I want you to know that I represent every single parking lot of the airport, not the airport, because we love seniority, and I didn't have it in time of redistricting. Anyway, it's so good to be with all of you. I want to give a shout out to Brittany. Thank you for running. I had an opportunity to hear a little bit from you, but I want you to help me give her another round of applause. Thank you for running. I heard the question, why would you, you're running. Why would you run against this powerful person, one of the most powerful Republicans in North Carolina? And your response was, people are tired. People are ready for those that are actually going to lead, that represent community, that understand the issues. And I want to thank you for having the courage, the willingness, and the commitment to say yes, even in a place where people may think that someone like me cannot run and win. I am running, and you are running to win. So thank you for running. And what people need to know about me is that I am the proud daughter of working-class Guatemalan immigrants. I'm the product of free public schools, free school lunches, subsidized housing, public transit, state colleges, and so many of the publicly funded supports that help working people thrive. And yes, I am the very first Latina in the entire Midwest to go to Congress, of many more to come. So as I think about where we are in this moment, I am clear just what investing in our communities is what makes possible. You see, investing in our communities makes public safety, healthcare access, achieving higher education, home ownership, small business development, and so much more possible for our families. But over and over again, you and I are sick and tired, but mostly tired, of seeing this administration, aided by Republicans in Congress, extorting tax benefits for their billionaire bosses on the backs of American people, whether it's in North Carolina, Illinois, Oregon, and around the country. You see, House Republicans, you know this very well, passed a billionaire budget less than a year ago that gives $4.5 trillion in tax breaks to the ultra wealthy, like Donald, yes, his entire family, Elon, Jeff, and Mark. all while so many of our constituents are literally trying to figure out how to stay alive because they cut $1 trillion in programs like Medicaid and SNAP benefits for our children. That's absolutely criminal. The extreme politics of Trump's Republicans are to cut, to rob, and systematically neglect working families while they try to sell us this austerity, fear, and division. They have the audacity to tell us that they are making all of these cuts because we're broke, because they know better. But we wouldn't be broke if the ultra-wealthy paid their fair share, right? Which is why I am proud to be in this room with Patriotic Millionaires. And I'm also proud to have worked with the Patriotic Millionaires to introduce last year the Equal Fair Tax Act. And just last month, Senator Markey also introduced it in the Senate so that we can get on going and finally pass the Equal Tax Act. Why are we doing this? Well, you know why. Right now, billionaires and ultra-wealthy investors who make money through investments and stocks pay lower tax rates than nurses, than teachers, and construction workers. You and I both know it's not right, it's unacceptable, it's unconscionable, but it's happening every single day. So this bill, the Equal Tax Act, would change the law to make sure that more of the money made by the ultra-wealthy would actually get taxed. And those common loopholes that you and I both know about, used by the richest households to evade taxes, are finally closed. And family farms, I know the question comes up about family farms, and small businesses would be protected and not impacted by the Equal Tax Act. Again, let me tell you, we're not broke. There is common sense legislation that we can pass to actually make the life of working families and everyone in this country better. The Equal Tax Act bill is one of those, and I need your help. So folks, it's time that we change the way we think about revenue and budget. We need to shift our thinking. There can be enough in tax revenue to fund affordable housing, to fund free education, to fund healthcare, and so much more. We can have enough tax revenue to make sure that working people are not the ones who get a break, that working people are the ones who get a break in tough times, not the ultra rich. So to get there, we need to fight for tax policies that help us achieve a working people's budget, one that ensures that Donald, that Elon, that Mark, and all of those billionaires, and some of the millionaires that are here that want to get taxed, actually pay their fair share, because you want to pay your fair share. Because one of the biggest lies we are told is that there is not enough for all of us to thrive, that's why we need to cut. But that lie needs to end today. We need to end the lie that leads to fear, to division, to competition, to greed among those who stand the most to lose by austerity and most to gain by solidarity. So help me tax the rich. Let's dismantle the economic inequity in this country. Let's invest in our communities and see what's possible, and talk to my colleagues in the House and the Senate and tell them to become a sponsor of the Equal Tax Act. Let's tax the rich, let's get it done, and I'm here to do it with you. Thank you.
I'm not sure if Congresswoman Ramirez heard about our lobby day tomorrow, but that's exactly what we're going to be doing.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, perfect timing. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Ramirez. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Andy.
Okay, I'd like to introduce two more candidates up to the stage, Dr. Kimberly Hardy and Troy Jackson. I'm going to, the other one, yeah. So instead of me bungling introductions, I'm going to ask each of you to talk a little bit about the races you're in, why you're in them, and a little bit of your background. We'll start with you, Dr. Hardy.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. I get to run in North Carolina in the congressional district that houses Brittany's state legislature. So we are going to flip our seats together. I am in... So I'm a social work professor, and so as such, it is part of my ethical obligation as a social worker to ensure that policies and politics are things that work to make lives better for the members of the communities that I serve. And so as second vice chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party right now, I'm in my second term there. In my first term, I was able to do a 30-county tour of eastern North Carolina. It is the highest concentration of poverty, and as I was going all around those various counties, I realized that there is so much economic disparity there that it's laughable when we say, oh, North Carolina is the best state for business, but it's not the best state for workers. And so in doing the tour, I realized that we have, in my district alone, which is 8 counties in the southeastern part of the state, 6 of those counties are considered Tier 1, which means they're some of the most economically deprived in the state. We have the second highest percentage usage of Medicaid and SNAP benefits in District 7. But we also have a great deal of wealth in 2 of the counties there. And so it's a very strange space, and it takes time to get to know the people there and what those issues are and to advocate for those folks. But our incumbent Congressman, David Rouser, doesn't do any of that work. And so he actually hasn't done a public-facing event in 7 years. Actually, now we're on 8 years. Has no intention to show up to town halls and things of that nature. And so as second vice, knowing all of this information, I thought we need to find a candidate who can finally flip this seat so that we can get somebody in there who actually knows and cares about this district and is going to fight for it. And the more I talked about it, the more folks were like, maybe you should run for this seat. And I decided that I would. And I was the only Democrat challenging a congressional Republican this time that did not have to face a primary, which was wonderful. And so now I'm at the point where we're going to take that seat back. Got more details I can share, but basically that's me. I'm a mom, I'm a social worker, I'm an educator, and I'm the woman that's going to beat David Rouser in November.
All right. Troy, you are in a race yourself, and you've also had a lot of success in red zone. So tell us a little bit about both.
Well, good morning, everyone. Really appreciate the opportunity here. I met my first and probably only billionaire when I was 11 years old. My dad, well, I'm a logger. My dad's a logger. My grandfather, my great-grandfather's a logger, and my son's a logger. And my father took me to a strike when I was 11 years old. And I didn't really know what I was going to or anything like that at the time. My parents had split up, and my dad used to take me in the woods with him a lot to try and make up for what I thought was, well, I'm sure he thought was his shortcomings. But this time it was to a strike, and when I got there, there's about 80, 90 men there, and they were just trying to keep the wages that they were making at the time for what is an incredibly hard job. And what I remember about it as an 11-year-old was, you know, they were laughing, joking, throwing firecrackers. And looking back on it, you know, it was, well, they were trying to get rid of their anxiety. You know, I didn't understand wealth inequality. I didn't understand power dynamics or anything like that back then. It was really my first labor negotiation. But when the landowner showed up, a billionaire landowner, you know, he'd get out of the car and he told all those men, you know, go back to work in the morning for I'm paying you, or I'll replace you all with Canadian workers on the H2 program. And for me, standing there behind my father, I mean, all those men, you know, got angry, mad, upset, swearing and yelling, and I got scared. I mean, I was standing with my dad. But it affected me in a way that I didn't realize until years later whenever I became a logger, and I didn't understand how it affected my dad. You know, standing there with his son, you know, having that man with all that power telling him that his life didn't really matter. You know, do it or go home. And later on, like I said, whenever I became a logger myself and we needed help and turned to our government, you know, people like Angus King, Susan Collins, Olympia Snow, they didn't want to help us because those same people with power and influence, money, they didn't want to help, you know, working class people in the logging industry. And that's why I ran for the legislature. And, you know, I pushed against all those people. I worked to become, into leadership. I became Senate President. I was Senate President for 6 years, and I recruited people into the Senate that, had the same mindset, had labor, backgrounds. And in the end, I could, pass any bill I wanted. Prescription drug bills, bills to do non-disclosure agreements for people that were sexually harassed, universal school meals. I mean, we did some really, really great stuff. But that power and influence was still there. What it would do then was it would go to the second floor where the governor was, and it would get the governor to veto. I've actually been the person in Maine that's had the most bills vetoed in the history of the state. So that's why I decided that, for working class people to get to where they need to go, and that's where I want them to go, is I have to be governor, or somebody like me has to be governor, and that's why I'm running.
I want to follow up, Troy. In 2022, you won your state Senate seat in a deep red area of Maine by 5 points. The next year, without you on the ballot, Republicans won the seat by 30 points. Tell us how that happens and why.
Well, I think it's really quite clear for my district and really for the people that I recruited across Maine. I mean, we focused on things that were important to everyday people. I mean, healthcare, prescription drugs, childcare, nursing homes has become a huge deal in Maine. We've lost about 40% of them. And, we couldn't get our governor to really understand how critical those were. Housing, property tax reform, reproductive rights. I mean, these are the things that our caucus, the Senate Democratic Caucus, not the Democratic Party, the Senate Democratic Caucus focused on and leaned into. And in my district, even though it was a district that Trump won, 3 straight elections, people knew that those were the things I was fighting for. And they believed that I was in their corner because, I was. They knew that was the things that they could count on me for. And we're definitely a very rural state. In my area, it was very rural, challenging. Someone that came out of the logging industry, they knew that I was standing up for them. Where I am, large landowners, if you say anything, if you get in line, you get your head lopped off. And I was the guy that would speak out for them, and they knew that. And so, economics for them was everything. And I would argue, I would fight, they made loggers independent contractors, so you couldn't unionize. So I put in a bill to make, independent contractors in the logging industry able to unionize. And, every time they needed something, I was willing to go the bat for them, and they knew that. And so for me, it doesn't matter if you're in a red or blue district. If people know that you're there for them, you're sincere, you're going to fight for them, they'll support you. And what you're talking about, I 100% agree. We actually beat Republican leaders, with that type of candidate that you're talking about in the state Senate. We'd knock off leaders all the time that forgot what it was about, forgot who they were fighting for, and sounds like you're going to kick some ass.
Woo! Amen. So Dr. Hardy, what made you decide to run against David Rouser?
So David's been there. This will now be 10 years. He hasn't had a piece of legislation passed since the Obama administration. Which is actually a good thing because everything he wants to do is terrible. And he consistently wants to defund the U.S. Department of Education, for example, while he himself benefited from a publicly funded educational system, K through 12 and into college, and now gets to live in this beautiful gated community. And I love that for him, but I would love anyone who wants to climb that ladder to have access to that as well. And he's climbed it and he's pulling it up behind himself now. And that's shameful. The fact that we have families who to, we may lose one or two rural hospitals in our community owing to nothing more than a lack of compassion. Everyone who has stood on this stage has said that we don't not have the money. It's not a lack of economics, it's the lack of goodwill and humanity and justice. And so I'm a social worker, I'm a justice warrior. This is what I do, and I have, instead of helping families navigate broken systems, I want to be a part of the system so that we can restructure it so that people can finally get ahead.
That's wonderful. I've got so many more questions, and I'd love to talk to you guys for hours, but I'm getting the hook. Right. So thank you so much for being here. Please support, give till it hurts. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Fantastic panel. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to another fantastic panel. This one will be run by one of the key members of my team on government affairs, Dr. Caitlin Henderson, who's our Senior Director of Wage Policy and Legislative Affairs for Patriotic Millionaires, which is a very long way of saying that she is my right hand. So I'm going to pass it over to Katie to introduce our next panelist. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Oh, this is interesting. Representative Ramirez really demonstrated. Okay, it's so lovely to be here with you all, and I'm thrilled to introduce a panel with me. I have Dr. Vanessa Williamson, who is the author of The Price of Democracy and a fellow at Brookings. And I have Dr. Jayoti Ghosh, who is an economist and professor at University of Massachusetts. Please welcome these two powerhouse ladies. Hello. Good, how are you? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about taxation and democracy, which is a very, very important topic, especially right now. And we have two leading experts on this subject. So I'm going to zoom in to the US, and then I'd like to zoom out and think about it a little more globally. So Vanessa, let me start with you. In your new book, you talk a lot about how taxation is as American as apple pie, which I love. Can we talk a little bit about what you mean by that, and what does it mean here?
So there's been this myth for far too long that Americans hate taxes, and so I was curious about where that sort of rhetoric had come from, and so I started writing this history book. And what I found is it's really quite the opposite. I mean, the reality is that Americans have been fighting for higher taxes from the beginning. So many of you will know the Boston Tea Party, right? And in this room, I bet some of you know the true story, but I'll tell you, Americans generally speaking do not. But the picture you have in your mind is correct, right? The Boston mechanics and artisans are there on the dock at Griffin's Wharf. It's a cold winter night in 1773, and they board these ships in the harbor and politely ask for the keys, and then break open 90,000 pounds of cargo and throw the tea into the harbor. That part's all correct. But the thing that you might not know, and the thing that most Americans definitely do not know, is what they were mad about. If you ask people, they'll say, oh, of course, high taxes. They were mad about high taxes. No, they were mad about a tax cut, a corporate tax cut for the British East India Company, which was a corporation that was deeply embedded with Parliament, deeply embedded in the British colonial project. They had managed to get themselves overextended during a speculative bubble, and now they needed a bailout, and Parliament was there for them and gave them a big old cash bailout and also gave them a special tax break to sell tea in the colonies. And that's what the Boston artisans and mechanics were mad about. Sam Adams, the leader of the Sons of Liberty, said that this was introductive of monopolies, right? This special deal for a corporation in bed with the government was introductive of monopolies and a danger to public liberty. So, this country was really founded not in opposition to high taxes. It was founded by people who wanted taxation with representation, right? Because taxation and democracy go together. And it was founded by people who wanted to ensure that the most powerful people paid their share. Okay? And so that's the sort of story I tell in my book, the story of how people sort of regular people across America have fought for higher taxes on the rich, higher taxes often on themselves, to fund important public goods, right? They wanted education, they wanted roads and infrastructure and all the things that a government can do to ensure the well-being of its people. They wanted those things and they wanted taxes. But again and again, they've had to fight against a small group of oligarchs. The first one, obviously, slave owners, right? Those people, that sort of people, the people who think that they should be in charge of the government, who don't really believe in democracy at the end of the day, certainly not a democracy with the power to tax, they have fought again and again to ensure that they cannot be taxed. And if they're feeling afraid, right, that perhaps these common rabble will have the power to tax me, then they will undermine the tax system, right? So we see taxation and democracy develop together. Can I tell one more little story?
Please.
Okay. All right. So, okay, Tom Paine. All of you learned about him in school too. One of the very best people, right? Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense. Erica, how do you get? You're amazing. You know, like Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense. You all know this pamphlet. You probably had to read it in school. It was the most widely read document during the American Revolution, and it argued not only that that America should be independent, but that it should be a republic. That is to say, we did not need a king, right? And it took the country by storm. And it's still, I think, a powerful message today. But he also wrote something else which maybe you haven't heard of. I mean, you've heard of the Rights of Man, probably. This was his defense of the French Revolution. Well, in it, he proposes a tax plan because, now we're talking at some years after the American Revolution, and he's thinking about the fact that if people are too rich, they can corrupt elections. They can have overgrown influence, as he called it. And he's trying to think of how could you address this problem, right? How could you make it so that even so that elections are meaningful, that you can't just buy your way into office, right? So he writes a tax plan. Literally, it's got the brackets and everything. It's right there in the Rights of Man. And this was really novel at the time. If you were living back then, the idea of marginal taxation was totally new. Like mathematicians and Condorcet were still like explaining how it would work. But anyway, so Tom Paine writes this tax plan right there into the Rights of Man, and it's a tax on the income from wealth. The bottom bracket is 0, and he carefully explains how the brackets are going to go up. And the top bracket, which applied to people with incomes that's equivalent of about $1 billion today, the very top bracket was 100%. Yeah. Now, so if you're thinking, are our plans too radical? No, you got a great tradition behind you, and there's a lot of room. So 100%, because he thought that far beyond the level of what anyone could earn with their own hands, far beyond the level of what you would need to raise a family, there ought to be a limit to property. Because if property could be consolidated too much, the way it was in the hands of, for example, the dukes and the earls of England, right, who had so much power in their system of representation, that if you could have so much power through your money, it would mean that elections wouldn't be meaningful. It would undermine the republic, right? And I think that story tells us a lot about today, right? And about what the founding generation imagined for us and what we can imagine for ourselves as we're thinking about how to protect our democracy.
That is such a perfect segue. Yes. Sort of the global perspective of the ways in which the United States was founded and the ways in which there was an adamant insistence on taxation as part of our democracy brings us to this conversation and the question of the intrinsic connectivity between taxation and democracy, and what does that look like now at the global scale? So I want to turn to you, Dr. Ghosh, to talk a little bit about it outside of the United States.
Well, thank you. And working? No. Great, thank you, and it's really great to be here and to listen to all of this. It's fascinating. So yeah, I was part of a committee on global inequality with Joseph Stiglitz and a bunch of others set up by the G20 presidency in South Africa. We did a big sort of overview of global inequality. The link between inequality and lack of democracy is so clear. I mean, it just hits you in the face. The degree to which the more unequal you are, the much more likely you are to be already non-democratic or heading very rapidly, or this massive democratic downslide, which I don't have to tell all of you about. I come from India, we've experienced it too. So there's that. But there is also the other link that it's not just that the inequality gives you less democracy. It is that that inequality is associated with much greater power of the very wealthy to ensure much lower taxation. And so while we've had growing inequality and worsening democracy, we've also had this massive reduction in tax rates. For the big global multinationals, effective tax rates have fallen to about 2 to 4%. The companies that Bezos and others run, okay, their effective tax rates globally are literally down to 2%, when domestic companies are paying, what, 34, 38, etc., okay? The richest people in the world, their effective tax rates are pretty much zero. Not just your own tax rules, but tax rules in most of our countries now enable the very rich to just avoid income tax altogether. So what's interesting, I think, is that, you know, the Tom Paine argument you made, it has so much global resonance today. So across the world, public demand for higher tax on the wealthy, and it's on wealth because people recognize that rich people have a way of getting around income taxes in so many different ways. So taxation of the wealthy has become one of the biggest public demands everywhere, including in autocracies, okay, which is kind of weird when you think about it, but true. Because I think everybody recognizes this link, that the lack of democracy enables the rich to get away without paying taxes. The greater wealth of the rich enables them to push legislation, policies, regulations to make them wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. So we are getting a global movement. We are getting countries that are willing to impose wealth taxes. We have more and more governments committing to, first of all, doing a wealth register, figuring out who the hell actually owns the money, where it is, because there are all these trusts and shadow companies and nice places you can stash it. But it is possible now to find out where it is, how much they have, and to tax them for it.
Absolutely. And Vanessa, your work as well talks a lot about how high taxation countries are the same that have high sort of rates of democracy or sort of demonstrations of democracy. Can you reflect on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think you actually can see here.
In fact,
This is you have a graph. This is from a recent article I did for Foreign Affairs, and it hits you in the face once you look for it, right? High tax countries are the very free, very democratic countries, right? It is low, autocracies tend to be low tax countries, and you can see that trend here. You'll see, if you look closely, you can see where the United States is. This data is from 2023. I'll have you know we've dropped about halfway down to the next, into the lower bracket just this year. But free countries are high tax countries, and that makes sense because elected officials are the ones who are good at raising tax revenue. They're the ones who are thinking about their communities. They're the ones who have an incentive to use the government to do things the community wants, which gives the communities an incentive to pay taxes, right? Taxation and representation, it's not just a slogan that's like on our license plates here in DC. It's a real thing. It is through taxation that you get representation in the first place, right? It's over the contestation over taxation that you get representation. And when countries get representation, it makes it easier to tax. Taxes go up, not down, as democracy spreads, right? And so across the world, you have this relationship between taxation and democracy, and between autocracy and other forms of revenue. Tyrants don't like taxes. Some of you will remember the Robin Hood cartoon by Disney from the 70s, where, you know, there's like King John sitting there on a big pile of coins. As it turns out, dancing foxes are not actually the world's best metaphor for political economy. As it turns out, authoritarians hate taxes because it makes them dependent on their people, right? They much prefer, for example, having a gold mine. They much prefer fees and fines. They much prefer spoils of war, and things that they can use to extract resources from a disadvantaged community or from their political enemies. But taxation doesn't work that way. You tax things that are legitimate forms of ownership. You tax work, you tax sales, and because of that, it gives the government an incentive to figure out, well, if we want to tax sales, it's very important that we make markets work well. Right? If we want to impose a toll on the road, we suddenly notice that there are potholes that are meaning there's less traffic. And so taxation gives government officials an incentive to respond to the needs of their community. It gives them the ability to see their communities more clearly, and it drives a positive cycle of taxation and representation. And the fact that this pattern, which is extremely obvious, actually, if you think to yourself, which countries are democratic countries, how much do they raise in taxes, that pattern has been invisible to us for so long, I think really speaks to the depth of anti-tax rhetoric in this country, and how effective they have been in disguising what is an obvious truth, right? That when governments and people have shared incentives to have the government do things for those people, it builds strong democracies, and strong democracies are well-funded democracies.
Absolutely. Well, and Vanessa, we were just reflecting on the fact that this chart that we're seeing, the United States' position has notably changed recently based on a variety of policies. But Jody, you spoke at our conference 2 years ago, and I would love for you to reflect on sort of what are the changes that you're seeing at the global level in the last 2 years since you were last here talking with us.
You know, in a world where everything seems to be deteriorating so rapidly in so many ways, I think taxation is one of the few areas where I actually see optimism, I see hope, I see movement. And that's amazing in many, many different ways. But I want to just specifically for all of you here in Patriotic Millionaires, I want to make just 2 points. One is that, you know, what happens in the US is you cannot separate yourselves from the rest of the world. And so US policy about global taxation affects you as well. Of course, it affects all the other countries. You know, the US got out of the UN Tax Framework Convention. The US is messing around with the OECD agreement and saying you cannot tax US companies, etc. Of course, it's bad for the rest of the world. But it is really bad for US people, for US citizens, because you are going to lose out on all that revenue. And it's done on the sidelines when you're not aware of what the negotiation process is globally. So the US stance in global negotiations is critically important. I think that's just one point I want to emphasize about, you know, that relationship. But the other thing I want to say is that, you know, there is so much potential here for presenting good examples compared to, let's face it, the really bad examples the US has been giving the rest of the world for the last couple of years, last year in particular. I mean, I cannot tell you the resonance Mamdani's victory had all over the world, and the fact that he was raising tax revenues on the rich as an issue, and the fact that he wasn't scared by people saying, oh, we're going to move out, which is the typical thing you get everywhere, every single country. We're told, oh, you can't do it because they'll all move and all that. So it's hugely important what you do here. Having said that, why am I optimistic? Because, you know, despite the US, we have now UN framework negotiations for a framework convention, which are happening, which every other country is actually engaged in, and where a lot of countries' governments actually feel that there is a stake. We have countries that have introduced a wealth tax. Colombia, for example, on wealth, I think it was above $15 million, 1.5% tax. It raised 0.575, well, almost 1% of GDP, which is incredible when you think, well, it's a very small number of people who are being taxed. And incidentally, nobody left, okay? And it was a tax on wealth wherever it was held. So you could be holding the money in Geneva, you could be holding the money in the Cayman Islands, but if they knew about your bank account, which you can with the automatic exchange of banking information, you would be taxed on it. And it really has delivered. There are other countries. In France, there's a 90% approval for the Gabriel Zucman tax, right? It got lost in the legislature because we know what happens with legislators. We've just been hearing about it in the previous session. But it's going to come up again. And it's going to be really hard for these legislators because people are furious and they want that change. So I think it's really going to happen this year or next year. We have other countries. The main opposition party in India has raised wealth tax as this huge issue. And it is immensely popular. We're getting that movement across Africa as well. In Senegal, in Ghana, in so many countries that, you know, you would think it's not an issue. So it's really important to have this happening in the US, not just because it's good for all of you and for people and working people in the US, but it's such an important example for the rest of the world, and it would affect the way negotiations happen that would enable other countries to actually tax their rich and to tax multinational corporations the way that they need to be taxed, which is the same as everybody else, basically.
Amen. So, thank you. The theme of our conference is how we win, and so I want to pull on this thread of optimism that we just started. And I would love for the two of you to reflect a little bit about what are the changes that you would like to see for us to tackle some of this inequality that we've been seeing and win being moved towards a more democratic space.
Yeah, I really want to follow up on the thing you were just saying about France and the legislature and how you can lose and then win. And I want to talk a little bit about our income tax, right? We all know that it's been terribly eroded in so many ways that it doesn't, somehow people's wealth keeps growing and they never had any income. That's so strange. How did they manage that? It seems, but so we all know that the income tax is not achieving what it once did. But I want to talk a little bit about the fight that got us our modern income tax, right? So we first had income tax during the Civil War, uncontroversial, helped the Union win the war. There's a Confederate general who said we weren't defeated on the battlefield. We were defeated in the Treasury Department, and I like to think that that's true. So the power of the capacity to raise revenue is so powerful for a country. But so we had the income tax during the Civil War, and then it was allowed to expire. They didn't need as much money, obviously, after the war was over, and they try and bring it back in 1894. But some things have changed in the meantime. A lot of people who had gotten very rich during the war were very, very powerful. Right? We're at the Gilded Age. We're about to see things like Plessy v. Ferguson. We're about to see a very, very reactionary time for our Supreme Court. And all of that is foreshadowing to let you know that all of a sudden, this income tax that we had and was basically uncontroversial, now the Supreme Court, reversing precedent, decides it's unconstitutional. Right? And you can't possibly imagine a Supreme Court doing something like that today, of course, but at the time this happened. So what did that mean? It meant we couldn't have a federal income tax without a constitutional amendment. And so what that decision by the Supreme Court kicked off was a 20-year campaign to win our income tax back. And I want you to know that all across the Midwest and all across the West, the income tax amendment passed basically by acclamation. Often there were literally no votes against it because this is the populist and progressive era, and the populists are talking about increasing the size of the federal government to end poverty. They wanted to expand it like the post office, they said, so there'd be in every town, in every place, to try and end poverty. And the progressives came in and they were fighting for the same thing, the income tax, because at the time we were relying on tariffs, which, as it turns out, fall heavily on consumers. You may not have heard, but people knew that in the 1890s and the 1900s, and so they were like, no, obviously we have to have this income tax so that rich people are paying their fair share, right? So we win all over the Mountain West, we win all over the West, well, but the Northeast. How are you going to win the Northeast? The richest man in the world, J.D. Rockefeller, who until recently I would have said confidently was the richest man who had ever lived, questionable now, he hated this income tax. In fact, it was his lawyers who had argued before the Supreme Court about why it should be unconstitutional some years earlier. So he does an all-out lobbying campaign. Memos go to every legislator in New York State, right? Obviously, this is the state where Rockefeller's going to have the most power. And at first, the New York legislature votes down the income tax. But then there's an election, and they get swept out of office, right? And so when the legislature, reconvenes, the income tax is brought back up, and the income tax wins. In substantial part because legislators were admitted, they're like, I heard from my constituents, I heard their distrust and distaste for my decision last time around. And so in the end, the barrier to get a constitutional amendment is extraordinarily high. You have to pass 3/4 of the states. But in the end, we got our income tax despite the concerted efforts of the richest man in the world, because the idea of taxing wealth is simply so popular with the American people. And so that's one of the reasons I feel such confidence now, right? When we hear about things like, even when there's setbacks, that doesn't mean we're done. Even when the Supreme Court makes a decision, it doesn't mean we're done. Even when the legislature votes the wrong way, it doesn't mean we're done. It just means we have to keep fighting.
Love that. Jyoti, any last words?
Well, I just wanted to mention that just like there are all of you progressive millionaires out here who are actually wanting to be taxed, there are others in the rest of the world as well who want to be taxed. I don't know if we have the slide from this French millionaire, Marc Batti, who has been supporting the Zuckman tax. Yeah, there it is. I mean, basically he's saying, if you have to leave your children something, you want to leave them a habitable and peaceful planet. Sure, you can give them some money, but if it's not a habitable and peaceful planet, there's no point in the money. And I think that's a really important thing. And I think more and more rich people even around the world are beginning to get that little, basic common sense into their heads. So I think this is a moment. I think it's a kind of inflection point. It's not only all terrible bad news and war and disaster and, verbal, incontinence and whatever on the part of our rulers. It is actually a moment when all of that stuff can generate real change. And I do feel hopeful in this, more than I have felt for quite a while in the last few years.
Incredible. Thank you both so much. And I hope we can all take an opportunity to learn history, learn lessons from our history to stay optimistic about our future. And now I'm going to introduce Holly Woodings back to the stage. Thank you all.
Thank you. What a tremendous panel. Let's give them one more round of applause. All right, well, we've heard a little bit here and there in many of these panels and talks about how popular it is to tax the wealthy, but we haven't really heard how popular it actually is. So our next speaker is Igor Volsky. He is the campaign director of Tax the Greedy Billionaires and the founder of Volsky Ventures, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about how popular it actually is to tax the ultra wealthy. So help me welcome Igor.
I'm just going to take it. Good afternoon, everybody. All right, I think the best way to figure out how popular taxing the wealthy is just to ask for a raise of hands. Who here believes we should tax the greedy billionaires and shift power back to the people? Hands up, let's see. Who's not raising their hand? Okay, there you go. Well, part of the reason why it's so critical to tax billionaires is because we are living in a moment of just incredible wealth concentration. It's literally worse than it's ever been, and this wealth is impacting all of us in all kinds of different ways. It's eroding our democracy when 300 billionaires make up 19% of all federal election spending in 2024. You have billionaire-backed private equity sucking all the value out of the housing market, the healthcare market, childcare, and passing on higher costs to working families, degrading quality. And then, of course, you have those like AI boys in hoodies who are just salivating at the prospect of taking all of our jobs, of sucking meaning out of our lives, and of controlling all of the power and trying to shape our future. So things are bad. But the good news is that the American people overwhelmingly understand that billionaires and extreme wealth are contributing to corruption, to higher housing costs, to higher healthcare costs. And so when you ask them, as we did in a poll just a couple of weeks ago, well, what do you think about taxing these billionaires? You get some really extraordinary numbers. 77% want to tax billionaires. That includes 75% of independents and 65% of Republicans. And it also turns out that candidates who prioritize or support taxing billionaires also do a whole lot better as compared to candidates who don't. And the good news is this is the second piece of good news, is that you have states leading the way, introducing tax the rich legislation from California to New York. And of course, we recently saw what that actually looks like in Washington State. So I really have a simple message for all of our future leaders, for folks who are lining up to run in 2028. We are in a new era of challenge. And we really have to be thoughtful about whether the rhetoric, the narratives, the tools we've used in the past are up for the scope of the problem. And I would argue that it's time to move beyond things like paying your fair share, paying a little more, and to really think about the need to use tax, to use wealth taxes and other tools as a way to reduce the net wealth of billionaires, because that money, even if you pay a little more, it doesn't just sit there. It distorts economies, housing, healthcare. So to me, the litmus test moving into 2028 is, does your economic policy, does your tax policy reduce the net worth of billionaires, and does it slow the creation of new billionaires? So folks really have an option. They could stand with billionaires, or they could stand with all of us, 99.9% of Americans. And if lawmakers and candidates and leaders choose the billionaires, then I know all of you in this room and all of us across the country are going to remind voters what those kind of people are really about. Thank you all so much.
Again and again, our most visible billionaires, because of this or some other combination of corrosive forces, and I have only named a few, because they believe that they are really that special and entitled, have held forth with their own incoherent, self-driven political theses and public behaviors that can only be described as childlike and even feral. Few examples of the messy, self-justifying political visions foisted upon the public by our uber-wealthy tech billionaires is more ironic and nearly comical than Mark Andreessen's ideas about what he calls the deal. But more, there are Peter Thiel's needy warnings about the Antichrist, Sam Altman's wish that instead of talking about socialism, we could just talk about everyone else being as rich as he is, Elon Musk's wish that we could put empathy in the rearview mirror. The examples go on and on. These men are welcome to their unintentional self-revelations, their insecurity, and their sophistry. What they are not welcome to is the keys to our democracy. Lives are quite literally depending upon us taking away those keys, and that will start with finding a way to get money out of politics and deciding that there is a level of wealth beyond which only madness lies.
I want to just talk a little bit to this data point about the top 1% paying 40% of income tax. Where are we drawing the line at the top 1%? Really, the problem isn't the top 1%. The top 1% includes a bunch of doctors and lawyers and entertainers and so forth making maybe $1 million a year. They actually do pay a pretty big chunk of change in income tax. The real problem is when you get up to the very, very top, the top 0.1%, the top 0.01%. These are the folks who are raking in huge amounts of income. And that's where it does get regressive. So yeah, the top 1% does pay a fair amount of income tax, but the ones bearing the burden for the top 1% aren't the billionaires. It's the doctors and the lawyers and the athletes and the actors who are doing that. So no, you can take data and dice it and slice it and get it to say anything you want it to say. But the reality is, we didn't get to a point where the top 10 millionth of the population, the top 0.00001%, is sitting on $3 trillion of wealth because our income tax is so progressive. And to believe these organizations like the Tax Foundation that spew out these data points like that, you've got to be delusional.
Have I extolled the virtues of our team enough today? Because Bob Lord, you guy's on fire. And when you go to the Hill and you talk to these tax staffers who are young and they're like, oh, you work with Bob Lord? And it's very impressive to them. He's really bringing up a new generation of tax nerds and just like beyond grateful to have him on our team. So next I'm going to pass it over to our friend and member, Scott Ellis. Scott talks a lot about how much is enough. How much is enough for a wealthy, full life? So we're going to bring him up to chat with us a little bit more about that. Thank you so much, Scott.
Kind of feel like we should have Bob come up and do a little fire in person. I mean, come on, that was fantastic. So we've talked about the challenges people are facing trying to make ends meet and how important that is. We've heard from Thomas Paine coming back from the centuries to say, wait, yeah, you could do 100% tax rate. That's not crazy. And now we're hearing what's really happening at the top. But I think for me as a patriotic millionaire, the reason I joined is I love this country. I believe in the power and the possibility of this country, and I'm very worried. And we've heard it today, I'm worried about our democracy. I'm worried about our economy. I'm worried about the fairness of our media. And I believe the single most important root cause of the problems we're facing is excessive wealth. It's the extreme concentration of wealth in a very small number of hands. And I think we've talked a lot, and our candidate Brittany from North Carolina talked very specifically. There's a number about what the minimum wage is, very specifically, in every state. So what's the number on the top end? And we kind of vaguely, oh, we've got billionaires and they're kind of bad. We don't talk very effectively about the upper end of the wealth distribution. And there's a reason for that, and it goes back to history. We've been trained that there's no such thing as too much, right? It's about being successful. And I've even heard people say, you can't put any limit, because if you do, then who knows what happens. It's time for us to start thinking honestly and clearly about wealth. So how much is enough? How much is too much? And what should we do about it? And I think we need a number and a rationale and a remedy. And so I'm going to propose that for you today. And this is not for implementation tomorrow. We've got a tax agenda we've got to implement. We've got things to do today. But we've got to start changing the conversation in this country and in the world about wealth. And I think we should start with financial success. Often we talk about people making ends meet and struggling, which is critical. But when we talk about limiting wealth, limiting excessive wealth, we're the Patriotic Millionaires. We want a vibrant, thriving society and economy. Let's talk about success. And we're all out there running around in the economy, working and doing our jobs, and we're very effective in planning that work, but we haven't even actually defined the goal. And why would we do that? Why would we run around and not figure out what the goal is? So let's define what success means. How do you get your trophy for winning capitalism? Right? What does that look like? Okay. So first, never have to work again. Right? I mean, that's job one, never have to work again. You've got a really nice first house. You've probably got a really nice second house. Your kid's college is all paid for. Your end-of-life expenses are covered. And you've got all the good stuff, right? The cars, the fancy vacations. I want to be clear. We are not scrimping here. I'm talking financial success. I'm talking the American dream, okay? So those are the things we're talking about. And I know this is hard sometimes because so many people are struggling because they can't handle a $500 unexpected expense. And this is true, but we still have to all think about it. What is financial success? And if you do the cash flow forecast, if you're late 40s, 50 years old, with reasonable expectations for investment returns and inflation, $30 million gets you all of this, right? It has to be unlimited. There's no possible number. Of course there's a number. Think about it. Nice house, second house, $30 million. So I'm not talking about what success is for me versus for you. I'm saying we as a society should decide. 10% of our households are in poverty. 80% of households have less than one, right? 80% of households have less than $1 million. So I think we should say there is a number where you get a trophy, and the number's $30 million. So let's talk about what to do about this. So here's my proposal. Next page, please. First, we've got to use a common unit of measure when we talk about wealth. It's really hard to compare thousands and billions. We get confused. So let's use millions. So remember, 80% of households have less than one. Median household wealth is 0.19, right? Half of all households have less than $190,000, which is median household wealth, right? 0.19. I'm saying 30. First, we don't use the word billionaires anymore. They're 1,000 millionaires, right? A billionaire has $1,000 million. I'm saying 30 is enough. 80% have less than one. So I think we should, like Thomas Paine, implement a cap on wealth at $100 million. I've talked to a lot of people about this idea, and they say, okay, I kind of get it. And I say 30 million, they say, could we make it like 50 maybe? They get a little nervous. So I say, with $100 million, you get everything I showed you before, plus what, 10 extra houses? I mean, how much more do you need to say, again, cultivating innovation, hard work, success? I think it's very hard to argue that $100 million is not enough. And beyond $100 million, and frankly, beyond $30 million, it gets hard to buy anything that makes your life better materially. Money becomes power. And power is how you undermine democracy and capitalism, how you capture the media. And so the real question for all of us in the society is not really how much wealth do we want fellow citizens to have, it's how much power. And so that's what we're talking about. So I think we need to get specific. It's no longer vaguely talking about the rich people at the top and, oh, they're going to space. Yes, they are. But you know what? $100 million is already plenty. And these people have far more than that. And so we should be talking about, first of all, amongst yourselves and with your friends and across our country, how much is enough? What should we do? I think we should cap wealth at $100 million. You submit your income tax form, you submit a wealth tax form. If the number is over 100,000, you pay everything above that in tax. That's what we should do. No more pharaohs, no more emperors, no more kings. Let's talk about it. Thank you.
Please welcome back John Driscoll.
I want to thank everyone in the room and on the internet. But for our last word, I think we go back to our great chairman, Morris Pearl.
People are saying that millionaires like me are going to move out of the city if they raise our taxes. That's absurd. The whole point of being a millionaire is so you can live wherever you want to live. I choose to live in New York City because we have big libraries like this. And we have universities and hospitals and Central Park, where I am right now. But those things are not free. I want to live in a city that has enough tax revenue to pay for those things, because that's where I want to live. I want my children and now my 6-year-old granddaughter to grow up in the city where I lived and have the opportunities that I had growing up. I'm happy to pay more in taxes so that all the people in New York can afford to live here. I'm happy to pay more in taxes to make New York the city where all of these people who make it New York can afford to live. The whole point of being a millionaire is if you're a millionaire, you can live wherever you want. I'm not going to move somewhere else because of my taxes. People who don't want to pay taxes don't live in New York. I live on Park Avenue right here because this is exactly where I want to live. I'm not moving, even if I have to pay more taxes so that New York has enough money to continue being in New York.
Woo!
So we've shared the ideas. You've now got the inspiration. Now let's get to work. We are the change we need to see in the world. Thank you all.
Please join us now in the Doyle Bar for lunch.